between us. We used to the sound check networks too. So just turn them on and then just talk normally. And then, Jane, you know your plan, Mike?
What?
Is this thing supposed to be moved now with the arts done? Did you say it was going to get moved?
No, when the public comment is
Got
done.
it. So for the whole first meeting, I could talk.
You could, yes.
And those were some people that the teachers contacted me with. They're like, we have no sites in our building. I'm like, below me. If there's any safety person in this district that's done
Fix it first.
Ours broke too.
Yeah, Keith said that.
Wow, let's not do that.
Let's get the disco ball going.
Unless somebody's willing to disco dance. Bob, I'll bet you disco dance, didn't you?
Oh my goodness, you have no idea. That means no, in case you were trying to interpret that.
So what you're saying, you have no idea.
I have no idea.
Do the girls have costumes around?
Yeah, we have a lot of costumes in our house, just kind of a lot of, just different dress-up stuff.
Yeah.
All right, it is 5 p.m. on Monday, October 26th. I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the Wausau Board of Education. So I think, I don't think that we need to read the intro any longer. We're not doing the WebEx meeting, so we'll just go to agenda item number 2. And I believe that will go immediately to Bob.
Thank you. I want to talk about a proposal that we've hinted at the last 2 times we were together at the annual meeting and then again at the last regularly scheduled board meeting.
Oh, sorry. Is your mic on?
I don't know, I didn't touch it. Is it supposed to be?
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we're catching it.
Okay.
David, are you catching Bob's voice?
I am.
Okay.
May I ask a favor? There's a microphone that's on the laptop on your table. Would you please move that around, that laptop? It's behind the silver one.
Oh,
That microphone, yes. Thank you.
great. Okay, we've been talking about this proposal for a couple of different meetings now, talking about how the budget repair bill was anticipated and it didn't happen and it didn't happen and it didn't happen. And I want to talk about timing a little bit. The timing of bringing this now has a little bit to do with a lot of our budget numbers aren't revealed until October 15th. And it has a lot to do with we publish the budget that we're going to present at the annual meeting long before the annual meeting. So 2 months prior to the annual meeting, when you publish the budget you're going to present at the annual meeting, you're kind of stuck with that budget. And then once the annual meeting's done and you start to get final numbers in October, then you can make some of these adjustments. And as we've mentioned at a couple of different meetings, the budget repair bill doesn't look like it's going to happen. Talking to lawmakers, doesn't look like it's going to happen. So the proposal that we have in front of you tonight, which will later be included in the actual final budget that you'll be able to vote on, includes a mid-year increase for all employees. And that mid-year increase takes all non-teachers, and just as we were anticipating in March, it increases their salary or wage 2.5% starting halfway through the year. Halfway through the year is different for different people. For school year employees, it happens at the semester. For calendar year employees, it happens at the turn of the calendar, January 1. And for teachers, it's half of the year, first semester versus second semester, but it's not 2.5%. It's what we already agreed to last September for the teacher transition plan. Some teachers were staying on the old model. Some teachers were moving to the new model. We approved that all last September. It would be the exact application of that, but half of it. And the budget impact is exactly half of it also. Now keep in mind, the stipends that we talked about in April and May already happened. They went out the door about a week and a half ago. So the stipends were paid. It's one-time spending. And one-time spending, as we remind each other quite often, it's not as damaging to the long-term budget. And we do have one-time money available in this year's budget. if we think of it as spending some of the overage or underage from last year. So midterm raises, as we were initially proposing them in March, but it happens at the halfway point. Another thing I want to mention before you entertain the motion, I sent it to you in an email, and I'm going to present it up here, even though you probably can't see this. There's the timeline that you see is proposed to be what we originally planned. I've got a big X through the one that we presented in April, but something to think about while you entertain this motion is this graph that you probably can't see here, but you might have to look at your email. Sorry about that, but it's in development. And we're developing a plan or a strategy through the freeze stipend mid-year raise. Some employees benefited from that. Some employees got a higher raise than they ever would have gotten before we even talked about a pandemic. If you want an example, think of maybe a lower earner earning $40,000 a year. They were expecting a 2.5% increase, $1,000. Instead, they got half of that, $500, plus a $600 or a $700 stipend, right? So they're expecting $1,000 and then maybe they got $1,100 or $1,200. They benefited from the freeze slash stipend slash mid-year raise. There are also employees that lost through the pandemic, that were not made whole. Think of some of the teachers. I think we know that we were giving pretty large raises for certain things, like moving from tier 3 to tier 4 was a big raise. If someone was disadvantaged by having a master's degree on the old schedule, you might recall moving to the new schedule and having a +3 we talked about, or a +2. Some of those raises were pretty significant. So some employees, many of the teachers that did that, were going into the year maybe expecting a $4,000 increase. A couple of them maybe a little bit more than that. What did they get instead? They got half of that plus a $900 stipend. And right now they're not made whole. We're not ready to prepare and give you a motion tonight, but we're working on that. The motion doesn't have to be tonight, but we can take those employees and make them whole, and take the winners, so to speak, and leave them be, right? And we could prepare that motion, and the cost would be about $175,000 of one-time spending, and we have to work on the affordability, and we have to work on the execution of a plan that's fair, and we would hopefully bring you that next operations committee meeting, or maybe the next operations committee meeting, and maybe payable sometime second semester, right? Managing when we're making all these other payments and workload in payroll and things like that. So the motion I have in front of you right now doesn't include that last part, but if you want to consider that fully, keep in mind we're working on that strategy to bring people up to make them whole, so to speak. So the motion we have in front of you right now, on the screen that you can't see necessarily, but you do have it in board book, okay? Reinstate the teacher compensation plan presented and approved September 9th, 2019, with the implementation of 2021 salaries effective January 18th, that's halfway through the year for teachers, and approve a salary wage increase of 2.5% for all non-teacher employees effective January 1 for calendar year employees, or January 18th for school year employees. And that's the motion I'd like you to consider, and with that, I'll field any questions that you have. Sure. It's to reinstate the teacher compensation plan presented September 9th, 2019, but implement it mid-year.
I have one question. A lot of the things you said I like. I also like the future motion and what you're working on, and I understand that that takes time. This may seem naive, but why not just go back to make them whole from September 1st and implement that pay raise, but subtract the stipend? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to ask?
That is a plan. The plan, I remember proposing this in April, And a lot of the excitement of the plan was some of our lower earners were getting a $500 or a $600 increase, which was a pretty large percentage of their expected increase. In some cases, a wage earner might be making $10,000, and a $500 stipend would have represented a large increase. We would have to take that increase off of any prospective wage increase that 2.5% would be, and it would be overwhelmed by the $500. But it's something we could consider. With the motion in front of you tonight, the numbers and the budget wouldn't exactly work out
That makes
by
sense.
function, but yeah, give it
I
some
see what
thought.
you're
We
saying.
could,
It just, if there wasn't a change because of no budget repair bill,
Yeah.
it seems like we could go back to what we
Yeah.
originally planned September 1st.
I think if we put together, I think if we put together this second suggestion that we're gonna still work on, although it might be a little bit more expensive because the winners will still be winners, but those that are disadvantaged by the freeze stipend mid-year will be brought up to what they would have been. So it does take those people and rise them to the level they would have been in a little bit different way than what you're mentioning.
So piggybacking off of what Beth just said, the goal is to make all employees whole. And by doing that, retroactively going back and then paying them, then if that's the case in which you're working on a motion for the next time, why don't we just wait and get that motion then so that everyone is whole, and then you can retroactively go back and then pay them going forward.
Well, we're not retroactively going back and paying them a wage, it's a stipend, so to speak. And the bigger thing is, it has to fit into the budget that we need to approve tonight. So I would like that first motion that represents the lion's share of this spending, $937,000, to be in tonight's action, so we can pass a budget that's pretty close to accurate. And then the smaller dollar amount, $175,000 is my initial projection, we could tackle that next month or even the month after that. If you felt comfortable taking that action tonight with me just saying it's $175,000 and we're going to take the people that are disadvantaged and rise them up to zero, probably would be enough for me to go by. But at the same time, I want to assess the affordability a little bit more, and I want to develop a plan that's fair.
So, Bob, a couple questions. When you say that this is going to make the employees whole again, at what point is that? Is that the start of the 2021-2022 school year, or is it at some point in this school year?
Regardless of what we do, 21-22 is not being impacted with this decision, with a later decision. And although I've been careful not to use the word promise almost ever in my career, I can't promise what next year brings. I couldn't anticipate Act 10, I never was able to. I couldn't anticipate a pandemic, who could? So I will just say that this is independent of what happens for 21-22. 21-22, think of it this way, even if we implement a raise on the last day of 2021, they get it for 21-22 and all, and any other decision we'd make with a raise. So, totally independent.
Can you walk me through just a simple example? Let's just take a teacher, $50,000. They were going to get in the new model, they were going to
Yes.
go.
Sure.
That
Sure.
That would be equated to.
Yep, yep. So let's take a $50,000 teacher. Let's say they're expecting a $4,000 increase because they moved a tier or they got a master.
Here, let's do the new model, where it's just, you get the increase for just your lane or your step or whatever you want to call it.
Well, nobody's on the new model till next year, right? They move a 1,300, I don't have it in front of me. I think the early steps are 1,300, then it goes 1,200, and I think at the very end it might be 1,000.
You first have to get them over to that.
No. Yeah, you're right. I stated that wrong. So anything that's done now, I'm trying to think of the long-term effects of the delay of the increase. So for this purpose, next year, if I'm thinking about this right, it won't have any negative side effects on what they'll get in the new model.
Correct.
Exactly. Think of it, I think the easiest way to think of it is, had they gone to the new model, or stayed on the old model, because some chose to do that, for this year in August, or if they do what we're talking about right now in January, they're going to finish 2021 exactly the way they thought they were going to finish 2021. Halfway through, so it does cut that spending in half for this year, but for next year they will already be on the new model. And then we have to start that exercise again where we ask for their answer by February, saying by February, let us know for the next year.
Okay. I think that if we could clarify that in some communication form or fashion, whatever you guys normally do, I think that would be helpful. It took me a while to get that.
To the board or to staff?
I think the staff.
Yeah.
We-
So our plan for staff is to send a letter. Once the board takes action, we'll send a letter that says, here was your salary, here's your new, so we would lay all that out for everybody.
We met last Thursday morning, and that was number one on the agenda. Pending tonight's action, we didn't put too much of an investment into it because we wanted to wait until the night, but that was number one, a communication plan of what just happened at the board meeting last night. Some people are tuned in and might understand it pretty well. Some people aren't tuned in at all, and we want to share that news. But last year when we went through the transition on the comp plan, we met every Friday morning. Every Friday morning there were 5 or 6 of us and we talked about these kind of things. This year it's Thursday, right? So Thursday morning every week we're talking, and that's number one on the agenda.
Okay, because this, I mean, to state the obvious, the fact that we're having this discussion is a positive, and we want to minimize turning it into a negative because of some of these misperceptions that may or may not exist. So figuring that out, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, and that's another reason why I wanted to hint at what we're working on, because that's another good story that I don't want it to get lost in everything. Well, what about me? I was disadvantaged by this freeze stipend mid-year. I want people to know that we're working on it. We're getting close to a solution. That solution is going to be affordable and fair, and we're going to bring it to you and you're going to be able to vote on it. And letting people know, and letting you know that we're working on that.
Okay, wonderful. So I am seeking a motion to reinstate the teacher compensation plan presented and approved September 9th, 2019, with implementation of 2020-2021 salaries effective January 18th, 2021, and to approve a salary wage increase of 2.5% for all non-teacher employees effective January 1st, 2021 for all calendar year employees, and January 18th, 2021 for all school year employees.
Second.
Okay, so that was a first by Jim Boucher, a second by Pat McKee. Any further discussion?
Does this just move this to November?
This is a special board meeting, so this will be final, this is final action then. Okay, no further discussion. Is this a roll call vote then, Cassie?
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't
The
have
next
to be.
one's
Okay. All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. That is 7 yes, 1 abstention, 0 no. Thank you, Bob. Okay, so looks like you're still up because we have agenda item 3, adopting the final 2020-2021 budget.
Yes, tonight I prepared 3 budgets, and one of them was pending what just happened, so I'm glad I put the most time into that one. So we've got a couple motions at the end of this one, and again, a lot of numbers are revealed in October. You probably don't see the screens, but I'm on the second screen right now, second slide of my slideshow, which has the calendar of events for the budget approval, and we're at the last step. So we're at the last step where tonight, you approve the budget, you approve the levy, and then we start working on next year's budget while working on last year's budget because we're still working on the audit. So we've got 3 years going at once. This first slide, the components of the mill rate, how it changed from last year to the annual meeting, suggests just that. From last year, mill rate was 10.79. A lot of things changed. Our annual meeting had it at 10.29. And this next slide talks about how it changed from the annual meeting to today. And you see at the annual meeting, we were at 10.29. And today we're at 10.29. And that all has to do with this defeasance strategy. Defeasance gives us that flexibility to hit that mill rate right on the nose by increasing or decreasing it. And you'll also see a couple other numbers up here that are big. The 19-cent positive and the 19-cent negative. Has everything to do with our enrollment going down. If our enrollment goes down, we lose revenue limit because revenue limit comes from your enrollment. But at the same time, we get a declining enrollment exemption that compensates us for it. So you see a positive 19 and a negative 19. So you think, well, that doesn't hurt us, but next year it does, and the year after that, and forever it does, because it's a 3-year rolling average. Another one up there that you'll notice is 7-cent increase. That's the increase in the parental choice private voucher exemption. That's not the whole private school voucher cost. That's just the increase from what we projected. We went into the budget season projecting the exact number from last year. That went up $287,000. That one, of course, is going to have its own slide. A lot of this has its own slide. A lot of this, small print, you can look at everything that's changed since the annual meeting until today. Most of the noteworthy numbers on this slide will have their own slide. Starting with this one, the general fund budget since the annual meeting. What has changed since the annual meeting? We started out, we had a deficit budget of $1.1 million. It gives us a little bit of comfort to know that about $950,000 of that was one-time spending. Most notably the stipend, and we had something else in there for Leader and Me costs that were one-time costs that are going to come out. So when we run a deficit budget, as painful as that is, it's a little bit less painful knowing that it's one-time costs that are causing the deficit. Then what happened between the annual meeting and now? Open enrollment, tuition impact. If you look at the previous sheet with all the small numbers, there's an impact on the revenue side and there's an impact on the expense side. Both of those numbers actually went up. We experienced more open enrollment out than we thought and more open enrollment in. The outs took over though. So our budget just got worse, more of a deficit by about $500,000. We were anticipating somewhat of an increasing gap in open enrollment in versus out, but we didn't anticipate one that wide. From there, backing out the impact of the budget repair bill. The budget repair bill had an impact of about $1.87 million that we were expecting until this version of the budget. This version of the budget just brought us back above the dash line. At that point, it's not a deficit budget, it's a surplus budget of $208,000. From there, we applied the motion you just made earlier tonight. Cost $937,000, that brings us back to a deficit budget of $729,000. And from there, we have typical changes. This is about what happens every year. We do an actual personnel roll and we understand which people are in which positions and their family or single plan and all the stuff that goes along with it. These adjustments are pretty typical, 132 negative, so we're at a deficit budget of $861,000. So you could make the argument that we're at a better deficit budget than we were at the annual meeting, right? Annual meeting, $1.1 million, right now $861,000, which you're probably going to hear about when we talk about that other strategy that we're going to bring to you in a month or two. Okay, the fact that our deficit is not as bad as it was at the annual meeting. This one is just so you understand that relationship between the revenue limit, the aid, and the levy. Our revenue limit went up $345,000. If people are thinking that's great, that's more money we have to spend. Most of that was for the private school voucher program. Okay, so our revenue limit did go up, most of it for the vouchers. Our state aid did go down. It went up from last year, but it went down from our annual meeting. And we know when the revenue limit goes up and the aid goes down, what happens to our general fund levy? Has to go up. Went up $572,000. So if the general fund goes up $572,000, what we ask taxpayers for, what tool do we have at our disposal to make it go back down? Defeasance, right? Instead of defeasing $13 million, we defease $12.5 million. We have that flexibility. So that debt issue goes from 16.6, which is all of our Fund 38 and 39 debt. That's referendum debt and the energy efficiency debt. We dropped that by about $500,000. Total levy, a pretty inconsequential $40,000 more, but the mill rate stayed the same. This one deserves some attention. It'll get attention the rest of the year. This is the impact of the private voucher program. The private voucher went up about $287,000. The special needs voucher went down about $2,000. Okay, all told though, this cost taxpayers, levied to taxpayers, $1.56 million for private school voucher program. Mill rate wise, that's 34 cents on the mill rate, or $34 for every $100,000 home. That's the impact. Again, we tax that, we get an exemption to raise our revenue limit, but we don't get to spend any of it. It gets transited to Madison and distributed to the voucher programs. Here's a less talked about voucher program. It's been around for a long time. It's the Milwaukee Charter Program. That one deducts $961,000 from our aid. That nobody talks about because it's been around for a long time, okay? But everybody in the state pays for that program as well. A few slides about defeasance. You've seen these before with the referendum right around the corner. In case anybody's listening, we're obligated to talk about this. This is a great story. The board had some great vision 3 years ago, administering some prepayment of debt. This is what our levy used to look like. It's the one with all the green bars and there's no dashed bars on it yet. We start to prepay debt and stack it up 2 years ago. Saved taxpayers about $600,000. Prepay more debt, stack it up last year. Saved taxpayers $700,000 in interest. Prepay a bunch more debt, stack it up this year. In a motion we're asking you to pass later on, save taxpayers $1.9 million in interest. And I have to ask the question before it's asked, can't we just use that to hire more teachers? Or it's referendum protected, right? So it's through the referendum fund. We can't just distribute it to the general fund. This is the proposal for this year, actually. That's the debt that we have remaining, so to speak. I don't know if you see this slide. It's got 590,000 on top, 700, 1.9. This is an important slide, especially if you haven't voted on the referendum yet and you're concerned with how can we vote for 2 yes questions or 2 questions and have no tax impact. Here's a quick picture of how that can happen. The blue is at what we're at right now. No matter what happens with the referendum, it is not going to affect this mill rate. You're passing a single motion tonight, independent of the referendum, right? But if the referendum questions were to succeed next week, the orange is the new debt payments, the gray is the $3 million increase in operational levy, and you can see it's still slightly smaller. The picture isn't really revealing, but it's slightly smaller than current. So that's how we can pass 2 referendum questions and still have that mill rate go down. Built-in flexibility to consider a referendum with no tax impact, and the flexibility that I mentioned earlier. We can precisely manage our mill rate with this strategy. This is a slide you've seen before, but the numbers are finalized. Our aid numbers are worked into that, so our levy, that's just the distribution by township and city and all of that. Here are the different funds levied compared to last year to this year, and the increase. The amount of dollars levied did go up 3.98%. Much of that in the debt service levy. Okay, debt service went up 3.67. Here are the expenses by every one of those funds. We did increase our expenses 2.22%. We were able to do that with no budget repair bill. Expenses went up across the board 2.22. Actually, in Fund 20, there's a small amount, so don't be alarmed by the negative 55. That's only a couple $100,000. Here are 2 motions I would ask you to entertain. They're both on my screen. I don't know if they're on your screen yet. 3 minutes to add. No, we can answer a lot more questions in 3 minutes, but we're going to stay on track. I'll entertain any questions while these motions are up on the board. The first one is the budget itself. The second one is the levy to support the budgets.
I can read the motion while you consider questions because it's quite long. So, excuse me, I'm seeking a motion to approve final 2020-2021 budgets as presented below. Fund 10, expense $108,544,218. Parenthetically, $97,681,295 plus transfers to Fund 27 and 38. And parentheses, Revenue, $107,683,263. Fund 27, $16,766,151. Parenthetically, $5,978,917 plus transfer from Fund 10 and parentheses. Other Fund 20, $237,316. Fund 30, expense, $16,489,463. Revenue, $16,240,035. Fund 40, revenue, $5,000. Fund 50, expense, $4,085,903. Revenue, $3,485,500. Fund 80, $1,083,838. Parenthetically, levy, fees, and carryover, and parentheses. Seeking a first and a second.
So moved.
We have a first from Jane Rouge,
Second.
second from Beth Martin. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor?
Can we have a roll call?
Oh, sorry, roll call vote, okay.
Jim Boucher,
Yes.
Jeff Lee,
Yes.
Kyle Lowe,
Yes.
Beth Martin,
Yes.
Pat McKee,
Yes.
Jane Rouge,
Yes.
Lance Trollope,
Yes.
Lee Webster,
Yes.
Tricia Zunker.
Yes.
9-0.
Okay, that motion passes 9-0. Do you have further comments for agenda item 4, or just proceed with the motion,
Nope,
Bob?
that was in the presentation.
Okay.
It's just a levy to support the budget.
Okay, sounds good. So I am seeking a motion to adopt a final tax levy of $47,971,350, representing $31,144,804 for the general fund, $16,164,346 for the debt service funds, and $662,200 for the community service fund. Okay, first from Jim Boucher,
Second.
second from Lee Webster. Any further discussion? Okay.
Roll call again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jeff Lee,
Yes.
Kyle Lowe,
Yes.
Beth Martin,
Yes.
Pat McKee,
Yes.
Jane Rouge, Lance Trollope,
Yes.
Lee Webster,
Yes.
Jim Boucher,
Yes.
Tricia Zunker.
Yes.
9-0, that passed.
All right, that motion passes 9-0. All right, big thanks, Bob, for all your work on that. I know that Keith would like to make a comment before we adjourn.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to cast a bright light on a kind of a rare occasion in difficult financial times, when Mr. Tess gets to propose something very positive for the district. So thank you and your team for all of your work. And I also want to make a strong note that sometimes people in the financial positions get accused of putting numbers ahead of people. And I think it's really important for this body in particular, and the audience, but this body in particular, to understand that it was Bob that took the time to analyze the impact on individual employees, saw that some were going to benefit, had no qualms about that, saw that some were going to be negatively impacted, and took it upon himself to come to me to propose that, would this be an action we would want to take? So I just want to note that Mr. Tess puts people ahead of numbers. He's just in charge of numbers. So Bob and your team, thank you for all your work. Appreciate it.
And this isn't the first time either. That's a pattern of.
Mhm.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob and your team. With that, I am seeking a motion to adjourn. That's a first from Vice President McKee, second from Jane Rouge. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Okay, so do any board members need a break? That was only 30 minutes, but just checking. All good? All right, let's proceed ahead. Okay, it is 5:33 p.m. on Monday, October 26th, and I'd like to call to order an Education Operations Committee meeting of the Wausau Board of Education. Second item on the agenda is I am seeking a motion to approve the minutes of September 28th, 2020.
So moved.
Okay, first from Lance Trollope,
Second.
second from Vice President McKee. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, one abstention. Motion carries. That passes 8 yes, 1 abstention, and 0 no's. All right, agenda item 3, public and student comment. Is there any public and student comment today?
Yes, there's 2.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Okay, so we have 2 individuals for public comment. All right, so public comment is governed by policy 167.3, public participation at board meetings. Anyone having a legitimate interest in the actions of the board may participate during the public portion of the board meeting. Participants will be recognized by the presiding officer and will be requested to preface comments with their name, address, group affiliation if and when appropriate. Those statements shall be limited to 5 minutes in duration. Speakers shall direct all comments to the board and not to staff or other participants. Public comments identifying specific personnel or students by name are not appropriate subjects for presentation to the school board and should be referred to the superintendent's office. Speakers bear the personal risk if anything they say during the public comment period is defamatory, slanderous, or otherwise harmful to another individual. With that, I will call the individuals in the order in which they signed up. And the public comment is right here at this microphone. Clerk Peck, do you have the time cards? Okay. So Clerk Peck will hold up time cards at 2.5 minutes, 30 seconds, and at time, should you use the full 5 minutes. We will start first with Lisa Clendenning. And Ms. Clendenning, if you could state your name and address at the start of your comment, please.
Hello, my name is Lisa Clendenning. I live at 1102 Sylvan Street in Wausau, and I'm a parent of 2 children at Riverview Elementary School. I am questioning why teachers are being relocated mid-term here. I feel it's been such a year of change and upheaval for our students, and now when we finally have our routines down and the kids know the schedules and the teachers are familiar with them and their virtual learning situation, that's what we're continuing to do is the virtual learning. And now we've learned that our daughter will have a teacher from a completely different school. And not only will she have a teacher from a different school, but she will also be having classmates from another school. And I understand that the numbers will be different because of people continuing to do virtual learning, but those numbers are going to be constantly fluctuating as people test positive and have exposures. So I'm wondering why we can't keep our teachers that our children are all familiar with and who are familiar with our children at our school and have, if there needs to be one virtual classroom, for instance, as there are exposures in a in-person classroom, then why couldn't those students then be moved to the teacher at their school who is doing their grade level virtually? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Jacob Pellet-Veldhusen. And if you could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Of course. Good evening. I'm Jacob Pellet-Veldhusen, 1209 McIndoe Street, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54003. Today at 2 p.m., the Wisconsin Department of Health Services tweeted, "Today, Wisconsin officially tops 200,000 cases of COVID-19. It took us 7.5 months to reach our first 100,000 cases and only 36 days to reach our second. In just 2 short months, the 7-day average of the new confirmed cases has risen 405%. A week ago, Melissa Resch, a staff member at the Wausau Aspirus Hospital, was quoted in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel as saying, "It's real world, and it's here, and we as individuals can help prevent it," she said. "Please help us save lives." Ashley DeMarinis, age 34. Demetria Demi Bannister. Tom Slade, age 53. Nakoma James, 42. Theresa Horn, 62. These are just 5 of hundreds of teachers that have already died. I don't want to see my mother's name, a teacher in this district, added to that list because her passion is for teaching. She needs to pay her bills, and you won't do everything you can to protect her from this pandemic. You need to institute virtual learning. I see the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that takes care of the 2 individuals who did sign up for public comment. There was a number of public comment that was submitted by email. So we actually don't have policy yet on written public comment. This is something that we had in the virtual meetings to allow for public comment, and it was agendized appropriately to indicate to sign up and the email to send the public comment to. And individuals have continued that practice despite it not being agendized that way. We have continued to post the public comment publicly after it's been redacted, but because it's not agendized, I have not been reading the names of public comment. However, we are addressing policy later tonight where we can address this as perhaps a practice we want to modify in our policy going forward. So with that, that concludes public comment. And we are on agenda item 4, referendum planning update.
Yeah, just a brief update. We continue to hold meetings both virtually and in person. Vote is next Tuesday. As you know, coming into this, we had some pretty strong public support. At this point, we're not sure where we're at, so we're anxiously awaiting the results next week. Today, we happen to have a wonderful presentation at the Noon Optimist Club. Had about 30 people in person and about 25 on a Zoom meeting. Good engagement, so that was one of our more successful meetings. So at this point, we're just going to, we have one more presentation this week, and I believe then we'll wait and see what the results are next week. Unless there are questions. All right.
All right, no questions on referendum planning. So agenda item 5, 2020-2021 student demographic report. Mr. Uding.
I'm not sure where Pat just took the microphone, so.
Well, it's up there, but you can
I'll just
project.
stand right here. So you can see in front there the demographic report that's been submitted to you, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time giving you just a general overview of the demographics in the district from this previous school year. The complete report was uploaded, as well as just a short presentation that I have covering some of the highlights from the report. The first page is simply just an overview. You see that we have 7,788 students, and you can see the breakdown of those students between the 3 different levels. Our ethnicity rates within the district have remained relatively the same from year to year, where about 36% of students are from an ethnicity other than white within the district. We have about 12% of our students who are English language learners. Our free and reduced rate rose a few percentage points. It's up to about 53% within the district now, and I believe last year it was around 49% overall. So slight increase in that. When you look at the 7,788 students, as we've talked about before and Mr. Tess referenced in his report, that's a decline of about 426 students, much more than we were anticipating with that. And as you look at those 4 percentages beneath that, I'll go into a little more detail on those, but you can see where some of those 426 students went and what areas that they may have chosen to leave the district. Now, it's important to note that 426 students down, but we were anticipating a slight drop coming into the year. Not at that level, but we were in a declining enrollment to begin with. So this year is a bit of an anomaly, and you saw just about everything rise with that. On the third page of the presentation, you see the third Friday count, and I want to draw your attention to the 3 red circles that I've highlighted on there. I want to draw your attention to that because if you look at third grade, it shows a negative 112. I highlight that because that was a negative 92 when those students were in second grade. That's a large group of declining enrollment that is rolling its way through our grades, right? It didn't just appear this year. It was 92 the previous year. That 112 will be another large group going into fourth grade, and it's going to matriculate its way through our enrollment process. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that one there. We knew it was there. It's slightly bigger. Same with 11th grade at 65 students. That was right around 50 students last year. So a slight increase, but it wasn't all a result of this year. The next number I've highlighted for you is that negative 66 at kindergarten. And if you go to the next page, it shows a decline of about 66 students in our kindergarten population. I put that on there because the next page, on page 5, shows the overall public and private kindergarten enrollment trends. I'll go ahead one more. And you can see last year there was an overall population in the city of 632 kindergarten age students. About 88% of those almost 89% came to the Wausau School District. 66 students down, but there was only a population of 570 kindergarten students available to us. And of those students, we captured roughly 87% of them. So over the years, we've always captured about 88% of our kindergarten students. An interesting note would be statewide, districts are seeing about a 5% decline in kindergarten enrollment. It's not a mandated grade, and there's the belief that many parents are opting out of it with the current state. Even more drastic than that is there's about a 16% decline in 4K enrollment across the state. And you'll see our 4K numbers were down too. So we're not an anomaly at those grades. It's something that's occurring across the state with that enrollment age group. Again, that next page, we've talked a lot about the 426 students down. So the next few points that I have for you go into that a little bit more in detail. So the next page talks about the transfer students. Now I want to make clear, transfer students is any student that leaves our district by a means other than open enrollment. They are not open enrollment students. The vast majority physically move out of Wausau and they move into another district. The two groups in that chart there are private school. They would just transfer. They don't necessarily leave. They go to private school. And home-based, could reside in Wausau but choose home-based education. So what was so surprising is that the number moving into the district, you can see, was 338, but moving out was 572. So that was a net loss for the district of 234 students, or roughly, I believe, about 36% of that decline in student enrollment with that. If you go to the next page, part of that transfer of students was private school enrollment. So I included this next graph to show you the historical perspective of private school and the percentage of students transferring to private school. There is a little bit of variance in it, but it is fairly static across the board. We don't send, about 6% of our students opt into private school out of ours, if you go to that percentage. Wausau School District students make up about, let me think how to say this, about 50% of private school enrollment. It's about 6% of our students, but about 50% of private school overall enrollment. And that's been fairly static. So we didn't see a huge spike this year in private school enrollment as a result. The next table shows home-based students and the number of home-based students that went, and I believe that was about 16% of that 426 students overall. There was an existing population of home-based students, And this year, it was 185 students, so it's up about 38 students from the previous year. But if you look back historically, that's gone up and down, and there's been years where we've been 170, 180, so that's a fluctuating line, and that 185 looks a little out of line with the previous year, but it's falling into that pattern of spiking up and down with home-based education. This next chart shows just the student transfer trends. I wanted to show you a 10-year look at it to see the number of ins. Now this is the move-ins, the transfers, not open enrollment. This is people coming to our district through any means other than open enrollment. So you can see this year there was a big spike, and it's surpassed any other year with the number of students transferring out. But keep in mind, our private school enrollment was relatively static, as well as our home-based education was relatively static. That option to move to another district other than open enrollment really increased this year. With people leaving Wausau, you would assume that most of those are physical moves and much fewer moves coming into the district. The next chart is getting specifically into open enrollments. The overall board, our demographic report, will show you new and existing numbers. This chart just shows you new students. As of they filed open enrollment paperwork in 2021 this year. So these are just the new numbers on this sheet. And you can see we had 109 coming into the district via open enrollment and 289 leaving via open enrollment. So for a net loss of 180 students opted out. And again, that's about 43% of the students in that 426 range that we lost. And Mr. Test referenced that discrepancy in open enrollment in his financial or the budget report to you. We didn't anticipate that. But 2020 is an anomaly in a lot of regards with that. Just a couple more quick graphs. You can see what I did give you in the next one is new and existing. So the previous table showed you just new. This next chart shows you new and existing. So that's the absolute total of open enrollment students in the district. Students that have been there, as well as the new ones. And I have two more graphs for you. If you go to the next one, it's got a bunch of red and green and kind of teal lines. That chart there shows you open enrollment trends from, I believe, about 10 other districts in the state of similar size. So while it appears we're on a negative trend in open enrollment, I thought it was important to give you a background to where other districts like us stand as far as open enrollment. So if you look at that chart, the red lines, that is open enrollment out of a district. A trending down line is an increasing number of students going out. So all districts listed up there are seeing an increasing number of students open enrolling out of their districts. We are not an anomaly in that. We have a big discrepancy, but all like-sized districts, you would see that trend going. If you look at, nope, go back, it's gotta get the right color. The green trend line at the top, that is open enrollment into districts. Most districts are seeing an increase or an upward trend in enrollment going in. Even Wausau, the far right, circled in red, has a slight upward trend in its open enrollment in. The blue line tells the story. That's, are you gaining or are you losing students? And I believe it's 7 or 8 districts up there would have a negative trend line. That blue line is sloping down. They're losing more students than they're gaining, and there's a few districts up there where there's a slight increase in their net. not to explain away our difficulty with it, but just to provide you some context of the trend. So what that really says, families and students are highly mobile across the entire state. They are using open enrollment to move and make choices that fit their needs, and we are experiencing that. The last one is just trends. It shows you open enrollment in and out, as well as the transfers. And you can see there's a spike in out, and there's a spike in transfers out, and they coincide, and together they give us the bulk of that 426 students. So those are some of the highlights that I put together for you. There's a lot in that report, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
So, John, a lot of data, a lot of graphs, a lot of information. What are the top, so based on all of your analysis, what are the top 3 priorities that you are pulling out of this, and what actions are you taking to address those priorities?
I think the priorities are to continue to understand the open enrollment out and what offerings we can bring to capture more of those. We started with WAVE. We expanded WAVE K-5. That population is, I believe, was around 90 last year. Now in enrollment at 226. So this coming year, we expanded that to try and capture more of the students that were leaving the district. So I would say we would continue to look at those open enrollments, maybe put some time into understanding that transfer out, and was that just an anomaly this year? Or is that going to be a trend we want to keep an eye on? I think that as we look at the Whole Child, Whole Wausau report, there are things, school improvement plan, there are things in there regarding equity and high school programming and things like that that we want to take care of to see if that addresses the open enrollment trends.
It's sort of, I don't know if it's for you, Keith, or for John, what sort of follow-up is there, if any, with the parents of the students who open enroll out? Not the transfers, if they move, but the open enrollment out. Are we getting any feedback on what the reason is?
So we have not done research on the last couple of years. I think the last study, and I don't know if Angie would have more information, but the last time we did a concentrated study, this was right before I got here, and the feedback was that a lot of it was work-related. I don't know if I buy that. I think people are just nice. You know, when you ask them, why are you leaving? They don't want to hurt our feelings. I would tell you, I agree with everything John just said, and to expand, there were 2 schools on that slide on page 13 that had a net positive growth in enrollment. One's Janesville and one is Sun Prairie. I can't remember if I've already told you the story of Janesville, but they used to be the bottom of the Badger Conference 10, 12 years ago. Not just athletically, but academically, most importantly. And they took a very strategic plan, using data, using feedback, surveying their families, their staff, focusing on educational adequacy and academic improvement, and they came to within the top 2 or 3 in that Badger Conference over about a 10-year period. It's not magic, it's just very focused work. And they now have one of the best reputations in that region of the state. And they're open, if you go back 20 years, you can see, open enrollment, I don't remember when open enrollment started, but they were on the losing end of the mobility scale. Now, as you can see, they're one of the few that's on the positive. So our key to keeping students and attracting students and being that district of choice, that destination district that we talk about sometimes, is really to dedicate ourselves to the strategic plan that addresses those 5 areas that we've heard about for years, right? Raise academic achievement, give kids opportunities, treat staff well, focus on the whole child, those things, and improve our reputation in the region so that we keep and attract students. Be very similar to a Sun Prairie. They've got slightly different dynamics because of Madison and everything else around them. But that would be my main answer in addition to what Mr. Uding has said.
So as you think about this, a lot of times people will put out surveys trying to figure out why people have left from that. Survey questions have to be pretty poignant, and they have to be made so that our feelings aren't hurt. Put the feelings aside, we need to find out why.
Yeah.
And asking very specific questions, I think, helped Janesville back then. And they were very critical of themselves. They looked internally to get external questions answered so that they could better themselves. I think we need to do the same thing and not wait on anything, because we can't look at this year as an anomaly, because if you look at that, you're kind of poo-pooing it away. I think we need to learn from it, and we need to ask those very tough questions.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. We, as you know, we've done some significant survey work this year. And we've learned some lessons both about process. One, the process when you try to survey broad numbers of people. One, we are not survey creation experts, right? We have reached out to a community member who has some expertise in that area for some help. But even once you create the questions, trying to manage the data. And again, we have to admit that we have some biases about our own district, right? So we've actually been looking at ways that we could, we use school perceptions, right? That's one way we've done. We've done Morris Leatherman phone surveys. We're researching ideas about ways we could outsource that so we could get unbiased, professional, kinds of really accurate feedback on some of these really tough, qualitative kinds of questions. So I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think, along the lines of what Jim said, if you ask, why did you leave? To be nice, they say the work or convenience. If you ask, what are the 3 things we could have improved most on?
Mm-hmm.
They might not tell you that that's the reason they left, but at least you'll have somebody who's leaving telling you the 3 things that they dislike the most.
Yep.
And that's, that's very unscientific, and somebody who's professional and it could do a better job than me, but that's the kind of difference between survey questions that it makes the whole survey.
Yeah.
John, do you guys keep track of teachers or employees that leave the district and go to another district?
Yes, that I would defer to Tabitha for that. That would not be a part of the demographic report, but I would defer to Tabitha for that answer.
I don't know. Does Tabitha know? Is there an exit survey for those teachers or employees that move to other districts?
We do conduct exit interviews for people who are willing. It's a fairly formal process. But did you hear the question, Tabitha?
I think I heard, is there an exit survey that's given to our staff members?
Yeah.
So there is some engagement with staff members when they leave about that process, and actually we're in the process of putting together this year's turnover data so that we can update our dashboard for the strategic plan. That information was last reported to the board during the short cycle report on the people strand. And that was last year before, I believe it was last year, it was before I started. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't part of any of that data, but we are in the process of updating that so that we can get that dashboard reset.
That runs into, just based on past experience, that runs into some of the same problems we just discussed with the student data. Oftentimes the response you get may not be the truthful response. The response may be, oh, I just had a better opportunity, or oh, it was closer to something. They may not be willing to tell you it was actually because I had a problem with A, B, or C, not wanting to burn that bridge, not wanting to foreclose the ability to come back, not wanting to just say something negative about somebody else. And so I think we, again, just like with the students, have to try to look for ways to get accurate responses. And maybe it is having an outside third party do it. Maybe that's a better, I don't know if that's a better way, but we need to find a way to get better responses.
Are they anonymous?
The staff survey?
Somebody from our staff is actually doing the interview. It's typically it's an interview, and there aren't that many people, and so it's hard to have a truly anonymous.
Well, I think if there was truly anonymous, you would get more honest answers.
Right, but if, let's say, just as an example, the answer is, the reason I left is because of this person, well, you know who it is now. Because there weren't probably 10 people in that building that left, there was one. You know what I mean? So that's I agree with you, but that's one of the roadblocks we've come to before, and I don't know what the answer is, but it sure would be good to find a way to get more honest responses so we can actually correct the problems that are causing employees to leave.
So, Tabitha, you'll be bringing a report. I just want to make sure we stay on the agendized items here.
Yes.
And I think it's good to highlight questions and the clarification and what we're trying to seek, but we have to stay on the matter that we are agendized to.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right, thanks, John. Okay, before we move on to the next item, I've gotten a message about sound. So I'm just trying to look back at David there. Are you able to tell, I'm hearing that the public can't hear board members. They could hear Bob when he was giving his presentation.
The microphones that are on the table in front of you are dynamic microphones and actually work better if they are closer to your mouths. Having them set on the table, they don't actually pick up very well. Those microphones will put you in the sound system in the house and bring you up. The microphones that I have up here are picking you up. You're just very quiet.
Okay. So would it help if we all tried to project a little more? Because we certainly shouldn't be passing mics back and forth. That would probably go against the CDC recommendations. But yeah, could lean into it. But maybe if everybody could just try to project a little more. I know it feels terrible. It feels like we're yelling at people, but we're just trying to make sure that we can be picked up for the public. Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move on to agenda item 6, partnering with Bell Timber for Forest Management Plan. Bob?
Sure. Larry Seiler apologizes. He cannot be here tonight. He promised me everything that you need to know is in the report. So, but I do know this, that we are going to be partnering with Bell Timber to create a forest management plan. And the school forest isn't the only place we have trees. There are a couple of different schools listed in there. We would partner with Bell Timber to develop that plan. Right now, we kind of have a plan, but more of just a description of what we do. So we would partner with them on when to harvest trees and maybe the fiscal benefit from harvesting trees. And we just partner with them to have a plan, but then they would also have first right of refusal. And the product that they give us, this plan for forest management, is very valuable to the district. So no action needed. I can answer any questions that you have, or I can do my best. Larry said he would be available on cell phone if I wanted to call him.
Do you know who we've done timber work with before? Because I know we've cut
Our
trees.
last time we put it out to bid, Bell Timber won the bid.
Okay.
So Bell Timber will win a lot of bids in this neighborhood, and the last one that we did, I believe they won. Now remember, we're bidding to get a high price, right? We're selling something, right? And first right of refusal says that you take bids the way you normally would, and if they think it's a high bid that they can't compete with, they just let the bid go to the high bidder, but they also have an opportunity to beat it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item is the Neola update. This is an action item. We moved this from a previous EdOps meeting because of the length of that meeting. Here's the thing. I know we have a proposed motion to move these all as revised forward, but this is our main job to approve policy and to go through policy. And I know there's been I've received a couple of requests to table some policies, so we'll address that as well. But what I think we need to do is we do need to go through each one. I don't think that we need to go through it. I can just read the policy number. If there is anybody that needs to weigh in, then I'll look and see that. If not, I'll read the next one. But I think as a matter of precision, we do have to go one by one. I know for myself, I only have about 5 that I really highlighted from
I
here.
have 13.
Okay.
And some of them are very small, just a clarification.
Right, similar. Okay, so I think we should also watch the time, depending how long this takes. If there isn't something that's urgent, perhaps we don't complete these. I mean, maybe it'll go faster than I'm anticipating, but I think we have a couple other items on the agenda, and those 11 p.m. endings are fun and everything, but I don't think we need to do that unless truly necessary, and I don't think we're there. So with that, I think that's the best way to approach that, is we see the proposed, and some of these are really just straightforward. So that's what I think I'll do, is I'm just going to state the policy, see if there's any comment. If not, go to the next one. All right, so starting with policy 142.1, electoral process. Okay, none. 142.4, oath. 155, committees. 162, quorum. 164.2, special meetings. 166, agenda.
That one I have.
I do too. Yes, Jane?
I would like to keep the original first paragraph, where the board president is part of the agenda thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm curious for the proposed changes, the purpose for the recommendation.
Sure. So this is actually a point I wanted to revisit with the board. As you know, Neola works with their attorneys to create draft policies based on state law, federal law, whatever it is. When we have policies that differ significantly from Neola, which is what we have here, you'll see the Neola draft below. And so what happens is, in this case, it's really just a technical correction in their draft agenda. You'll see they changed the word from from community meeting to a public hearing. The intent for their changes is to change it from a public participation to public comment, right? That's the general gist of the change in the agenda policy. Now in ours, when we have a policy that differs significantly from Neola, we have a very difficult times in many cases, bless you, trying to identify the intent of the change, the content of the change, and then working it into our policy. So what we brought to you tonight was we could, eliminate what we have here, keep the Neola policy below, and then we would be in line with their policies and all of their future updates. And the second important piece to remember about Neola policies, and this one is not a great example, but is that if for some reason, if we change their policy significantly, content-wise, we also assume the risk for that policy, but if we use the Neola policy, because they created the draft, they assume the risk that might be associated with it, whatever that might be. So I think that was a good opportunity just to talk about that difference. I'm sorry?
Do you associate a risk with the maintenance of our traditional policy?
I've never had any sort of I'm assuming the risk is some sort of a legal challenge to the policy itself. I've never experienced that. So I don't believe it to be an imminent risk. It's just something that we want to be aware of.
Do we have, as far as this update, do we also get consultation services with them that we could say, we want to keep this one the same? Can we dig into it a little deeper and see what our risk is?
We could, absolutely. So we have, you might recall that Mr. Bannock is our representative from Neola. He came and met with you when we first adopted policies. He's contracted to come and meet with, what we do is we do a draft. We take the drafts as a Longfellow team or as principals or whoever needs to be involved. School nurses, right? Whoever the experts are. We make our recommendations, then we invite Mr. Bannock back We go through the recommendations together as a team. He gives us the feedback from, whether it's from Neola or other districts, and then we finalize that draft to bring to you.
So on this particular policy, I would recommend that we keep our old policy. We are an elected board, and it seems strange to me that we would not have any say in the establishment of the agenda.
Well, I mean, the new policy does say that individual board members can include items on the agenda as long as the president agrees. So in other words, if the president wants to put one on the agenda, the president gets to it. So it does cover that, which is similar to the old policy in that way.
Not quite at the same level as collaborating to develop the
Yeah.
I think this opens a can of worms too. Right now we have
I guess it's
to,
a question of how much collaboration actually takes place. Is it at this point simply sent to the president signs off and goes back? Or are you holding planning meetings together to come up with the agenda?
At this point, it depends on the content. of
yeah, for
potential
instance,
content.
I asked for a project we launch update that wasn't originally on the agenda, but oftentimes there's not really any requests that I have to make.
So, and again, just a reminder, where this puts the responsibility on me, it does not say that this would not be a collaborative process. Now, I agree, it should be a collaborative process. It's a board meeting, it's a board agenda. So we could keep our old agenda, our old policy, or we could take that piece about including and I can't read it because it's too small, the collaborative piece approved by the board president, and we could insert that in the new agenda. That would be another option.
If I may, right now on our regular board meetings, we have the board referral process, where it's a board discussion if we want to further something. This, like I said, I think it opens up a can of worms, and I'm not saying that about any, the composition of this board, but if individual board members can include items on the agenda upon concurrence of the board president, I could envision perhaps a board member that has a lot of requests that aren't going to be fulfilled, whereas right now we have a board referral process for that type of action that is a board discussion. And I think that process is a little bit better than what we have proposed here.
Well, the board referral process is for when, we're asking for more than just a presentation, but for a big study, the formation of a committee, that's like a big thing. In the original agenda that we have there, it used to not have that last sentence that basically gave board members a way to get something on the agenda without the president's permission. And I pushed to add that when I was president because I didn't want myself to be, I didn't want to have the power to decide. And so when I first read this policy, I thought, ooh, we need to keep that, because I still think that's valuable. But then there's a different policy that we reviewed tonight about special board meetings and how any board member can call a special board meeting. So I thought to myself, well, maybe we don't actually need that, because if the president says no, that board member can say, fine, I'm just going to call a special board meeting. And if a board member has the power to literally call a meeting for their one agenda item, we maybe don't have to also have the power to override the president for that. For this regular meeting or that option meeting. So I guess my initial instinct was, well, we got to keep that, because I wanted it once upon a time and, possessive of it. But when I saw the other policy, I thought, we probably don't really need it. But I don't really have a strong preference, though, if other board members like the original one better. I think they accomplish sort of the same thing.
I would prefer to keep the original, but then do some consulting on that particular one with our representatives, just to see what a risk is and what we're what they have.
I suspect this would be the type of policy, like you said, Keith, isn't really a good example of us having risk, setting our own agenda. They'd probably say it, unlike when we get into some of the legal ones about Title IX and that sort of thing.
I think this is a situation of if it's, what is the expression? I can't think, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I think that we have a good process now. We have a couple of past board presidents that probably could attest to the process under the current policy as well being a good process here tonight. So I would suggest that we stay with our existing policy on this one.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So we're
Okay,
keeping
so
the original on 166?
Yes. 166.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we left off with 166, moving on. 167.3, public participation. I do have a couple of comments. I see that it appears that the committee meetings have been removed, which we did add last year. It's at any regular meeting of the board.
Right, yeah. So we assume that, and we can certainly add that committee in there. We assume it included, if it's a regular meeting, it's a regular meeting, committee or board meeting.
Okay.
We certainly weren't trying to exclude.
Okay. Another thing I would suggest is, I would suggest that we limit the public comment period to 3 minutes. And this is something when I spent a lot of time at other school districts and I gave public comment on behalf of the WASB resolution. 3 minutes is actually pretty standard. 5 minutes is quite long, and I think this is standard in some other local governments as well. And it does allow for more participation. So I don't know if anybody has any strong thoughts on that, but that is a suggestion that I have. I have one more comment on this, but I'll just open it to discussion on that.
Fine with me. I think that's fair.
Where's the 30 minutes?
Yeah, that is in here. That's a little bit later. So I'm at E, and that's each statement made by a participant should be limited to 5 minutes. My recommendation would be 3 minutes. But then when you go down to J, that's where it's 30 minutes unless extended by a vote of the board.
Get in more people.
It allows more participation, and again, just based on my my own experience in using public comment in a lot of places, 3 minutes is actually standard. Okay, so we can make that modification. And then the last suggestion I have on this is, I think we've set kind of a precedent now with the written public comment. And I don't know how anybody feels about this, but I think the ability of people to provide public comment that is then posted publicly once redacted, I think it's another way to offer public comment. And perhaps instead, though, we create a new email, comments@wausauschools.org, so it's not flooding Cassie's email. I don't know that it would create a whole lot of work generally when we're not in these pandemic times, but I think it's just another way to be a little more inclusive as it relates to public comment. And I would suggest adding a written submission in that matches the practice we've been doing, except that we wouldn't read the written submission. I mean, we could talk about that. I just don't think it's necessary. They're going to be posted publicly.
What are your thoughts on the fact that when people come to speak to us in person, they have to give their name and their address so that we know who they are and so that we know whether they're an actual resident of our district as opposed to somebody outside just commenting? What is your thought on that as it applies to the written emails? Because I could envision topics that might garner many. I mean, you could get a group to get together and send in 500 emails from people that don't even reside in Wisconsin, let alone in our district. And I think if we're going to adopt a policy that allows it, we need to set some ground rules on what we're willing to actually publish on our district webpage and what we're not.
Right, I think you need to make a distinction there between what is public comment, a section for public comment, and then a section for, just letters to the board, which are not public comment.
Yeah, because if it's letters or emails to us, and there is no name or address tacked to it, that is no longer a public comment, that is a private comment.
But we currently receive
No, I-
emails that are called public comment that are just as you just described, so.
No, I understand.
Or where they
I-
ask that there may not be.
I agree with you. I don't think, to me, it's a very different scenario. Someone who comes here and is passionate about wanting to speak on something and takes the time to do it, rather than someone firing off an email because they're upset and don't use my name. I agree.
I mean, we can eliminate anonymity, absolutely. That seems, of course, yeah, that would certainly be one thing. I understand what you're saying. I think there are times though where there is a legitimate interest to hear from, I don't know, experts on something or a group that's particularly
Yeah, and
impacted.
I'm not even saying that we should exclude it.
Mhm.
I'm just saying we need to think about it.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to run into a situation where Cassie got 1,000 emails to go through, or
Yeah.
because it got onto some email chain, all you gotta do is email it's public comment, and we have a policy that says she has to go through and redact all those and put them on there, we don't know who these people are.
Could we?
And maybe I'm thinking about something that won't happen, but I think
No, it's good to anticipate. I mean, we could include a line that includes some level of discretion by the board. If we determine this is just trying to flood and actually isn't serving any legitimate purpose to board business, then we could disregard it.
You
Could
can
have-
say it's somebody's discretion because
Mhm.
it's really easy for some keyboard warrior to sit in their parents' basement and send out a bunch of junk.
But I don't think we've seen that now. And that's what I guess that's where I'm at, is that there's a lot of people that do want to continue to provide public comment. We've established this precedent. We certainly are still in the midst of a pandemic where there probably are people that want to attend the meeting, but they aren't because they are following safe protocols or safer protocols or whatever. But to that extent, you know, I'd like that we can still continue to include them.
Absolutely.
But, so why don't we
May I make
table
a,
this one and have some draft?
may I make a
Yes,
suggestion?
Yes, you probably have the best idea.
No.
To deal with it.
As you were talking, I was just thinking we could create a Google form like we do for board liaisons, and required entries be your name, your address, and then a section where you can make a comment. And that would auto-populate into a spreadsheet, but we'd have the address, we'd know if it's a local. Granted, we don't know if they're telling the truth, but we don't know if they're telling the truth when they're standing up here. True.
would that make your job easier too? You wouldn't have to redact an email out then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and that's a good thing. I'm not accusing you, but it's a good suggestion.
But that's a way we can capture, because otherwise if we're relying on them to put it in the email, people will forget and then I have to contact them.
Yeah.
But if it's a
Yeah.
required field, we're going to be
Sure.
capturing that
That's
address.
great.
So if we can create a submission box that does all that for us, on the website is done.
I like that idea.
Yeah,
It's a good idea.
absolutely.
Yep.
So could we maybe work on some draft language? I'm happy to work on that language and bring this back just to try to capture the concerns that are raised here, but also still be inclusive as it relates to public comment. Are there other concerns? Those are the only ones I had. Are there other concerns in this public participation at board meeting policy? All right, I'm not hearing any. So that takes us to 168.1, meeting minutes. Any concerns? All right, 172, legal counsel. 173, independent auditor. 1130, conflict of interest. I think we do have a little bit of a change here in some language, and I'm wondering if we need to incorporate a standard in 1130. So it says, for these reasons, the board adopts the following guidelines that are designed to avoid the occurrence or appearance of any conflicts of interest. I don't know if we need to incorporate some kind of standard under an objective standard, perhaps, because there could be somebody that, from their perception, there's a conflict of interest, but it's not necessarily an objective standard or a reasonable person standard. Anybody have any thoughts there?
I understand what you're saying, I'm just trying to figure out how you execute it.
Well, because I think without some language, there's the possibility of a lot of claims of, well, it appears like there's a conflict, and that's going to suffice in and of itself with this language.
Yeah, I think what that language is supposed to mean isn't that. I think it's supposed to mean you don't vote on something that falls under one of these categories, even though your conflict wouldn't actually change your vote. You don't actually feel like you're conflicted, but it looks like you are. Like if it, my wife is a teacher, and we were talking about the audit of bills committee. I always look to make sure there isn't a $30 mileage fee on there that I'm not voting in favor of. Now, obviously, I wouldn't feel conflicted to vote on the $30 mileage check, but it gives the appearance that I'm conflicted, and so I would not. But it still falls back on one of the actual ways you would literally be conflicted. I don't think my vote would change over $30 or $10 or whatever small example you want to use, but it gives that appearance, and so I wouldn't vote on it.
So how is this different, though? Either Dr. Hiltz, you're proposing this, or Lance, in your example, how is it different than existing practice and policy?
Well, in the original draft, it says that these guidelines are here to assure that conflict of interest does not occur. Well, that's a tough standard. So I think the intent of these changes is just to, say our goal is to avoid the appearance, right? So we're kind of softening the stance on the conflict of interest. Although instead of just talking about absolute conflict of interest, so for instance, if someone has a company, we're not taking bids from their company or things like that. So this is saying we can't guarantee it's not going to occur. However, and of course that's a whole other standard. I don't know the legal standard, but so I guess it's again some recommendations from the Neola attorneys around conflict of interest, and when Mr. Bannock came and spoke, he specifically spoke to the appearance, the public appearance of conflict.
I'm concerned about it because of what just recently happened. I mean, it was definitely bullying, trying to get some of the members of this board not to be able to vote so that they could have their way. And I just wonder if this language is going to move that forward.
Well, that's why I asked for incorporation of a standard in this sentence. Because if you just say, avoid the appearance of any conflict of interest, that anybody can get up and say, you have a conflict. It appears to me you have a conflict. So we have to incorporate either an objective standard or something. Because this could be, somebody has a child in a school and serves on the board. I'm giving that because I'm a mother and one of my kids in the school, so I'm just going to use an example of myself. Somebody could say, oh, you're showing certain treatment to that school. It appears that way to me because your kid goes to that school. I just think that it's opening the door to some risk when we're trying to mitigate risk.
Well, the policy already, you can see from the language in that paragraph, it already did refer to appearance of, so that, I don't think it changes anything, but it does say appearance for a second time. Maybe it highlights it more. I don't think it changes.
But Vance, you being a lawyer, sometimes we need almost more specific language because of the fact that appearance, that's what the WAS talks about all the time. This could be an appearance of that. It becomes very ambiguous. I think what you're saying, Tricia, is that can there be something more specific?
Because who's saying that it's...
That's why I'm just asking under an objective standard. So somebody can't get up and say, oh, it appears to me like there's a conflict. And, well, that's how it appears to that person subjectively. I think here we do need just a phrase in there for some increased precision.
I'm trying to reconcile objective and appearance. Because those two words don't really go very well together, which maybe is the problem with the word to begin with, but.
You know, the second sentence that was referenced says that, or from situations that create the appearance of a conflict of interest.
With a statutory reference, though. That's with reference to 1959, right? I believe that's the.
Right, and we'd have to wrap our heads around what a situation would look like that would create the appearance. And without that, I don't know how we come up with a standard for appearance.
If I could offer, when I read this, the whole intent, other than the legal definition of, conflict of interest from a contractual standpoint, is the idea that we're trying to build trust in the community's, build community trust in the board's decisions. That's the intent. So whether we say it's an appearance or not, the idea is, does this help us build confidence in the board's decisions? So that's where I was coming up with this.
I'm happy to do a little more research maybe on some other district policies, just because I don't think this language is, with this appearance, without something more, I think that could open the door to some problems.
I agree with that.
I wonder if there are any policies that make it clear that the individual board member is the one who makes that decision. We know that legally that is the case, but not everyone knows that. So that might be something also useful to look into.
Okay. All right, so if everybody's okay with that, and if anybody else wants to do research too, but I'm happy to do some more. I don't think we're in any urgency with this policy, but I'll do some research on that.
Is there some place in here that it indicates what happens if there is a potential or apparent conflict of interest and how is handled?
Well, if there's an actual legal, if there's a legal conflict of interest and a board member ignores it or disregards it and goes forward and votes, then they can be prosecuted. Like that's the action. That's the result of a board member violating the law and voting when they have a legal conflict of interest. The DA investigates and files charges if they think it's warranted.
It's a potential felon.
Right.
All right, is there any other concern or language to address in that particular policy? So we're going to table that one as well. Okay, 1220, employment of the district administrator. Any comments, questions, concerns? All right, hearing none, moving on. 1260, incapacity of the district administrator.
Yeah, I was wondering why we're taking out the paragraph about the two positions, and if they don't agree, then you get a third one. That's the process I went through when I got injured at work. Yeah, why would
When we say we, this is a Neola suggested change. Is that right?
Let me remind myself. Oh, yes. This is a Neola suggested change. I think just due to the cumbersome nature of the process. There's a strong interest matter. Is this a technical? Oh, this is a real.
and there's the expense if we're going to use all those positions, but I think that's an important one too.
So we're hearing some support for keeping the policy as it was, at least, what is that, the fourth paragraph? Other comments on that?
Could I just, give me a minute to do
Sure.
a little bit of research on the rationale for the change.
It seems like such a rarity, but if it is in fact needed,
So
Well, why don't we come back to that one? I'll give you just a minute to look something up.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, so we'll come back to that after Dr. Heltz has a minute to look something up. So in the meantime, let's move on. 2131.01, reading instructional goals.
I just had a question about that. Is the change because of language, that it was just too specific, and so we wanted it to be more broad as RTI changes to systems of support, that kind of thing? Kind of what I thought it was. I'm assuming that's what the reason for the change is, but I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I was
That's okay.
distracted. What's your question again?
The reading of instructional goals.
Okay. I wonder, I don't know, Chris, were you involved in the drafting, or Andrea, or?
We all were. So the changes, the RTI, actually, we were just reflective of what RTI structures and the RTI framework is now more commonly referred to as, which is a multi-tiered system of support or multi-level system of support.
That's
so
what
we
I
were just
figured it was.
updating the language to be reflective of what the framework is currently
Okay.
referred to as.
That answers my question.
I do have 12, 16.
Okay. Yeah, so you've got that pulled up. Are there any other comments on 2131.01? Everybody's okay with that as proposed changes? Okay. So Keith does have information about the previous policy to address.
Nothing earth-shattering. It's just, it's a listing of the reasons they make the recommendations, and here it just says, the policy is revised to clarify the board's process in evaluating and determining that the district administrator is unable to work and to appoint an interim district administrator, and then just says the adoption is recommended. If it's a statutory requirement, then they say it's required. So it's up to the board. It's just a clarification of the process. So you can do whatever you'd like in that case.
I remember we spent a lot of time on this one when we were first switching to Neola.
Sure feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's, it's such a rare situation, but should this type of situation arise, it is ideal in policy that there is this procedure in place. We've got these two that there's going to be a disagreement, so then there's a third impartial position, because what would a board do if this particular part of the policy was not included? What would our recourse be?
It almost seems like it's more necessary because of the additional language in reading. Because if we were to actually hire two different doctors and they disagreed, we almost need to have the tiebreaker.
And in the end, everybody feels more satisfied when you really touch more bases and got more opinions. So somebody isn't left feeling like they got taken advantage.
I think that's a good point, Jane, because if the board had to encounter this situation, I think having more expert opinions is ideal. So,
And there are independent panels that exist out there that board anybody can leverage to get an objective opinion of something local seems to be important. So I think it's a good idea.
to keep that fourth paragraph?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other change to the third paragraph, the part they crossed out and read, I think is fine to leave crossed out and read, but I think adding that fourth paragraph back in would be good.
I agree.
Capture that?
Okay, so we're adding the fourth paragraph back in.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, does everybody feel, I'm kind of looking for head nods here. Okay, looks like it. Okay. Okay, that concludes that. That one. So now we're at 2260.01, section 504 ADA prohibition. Anything?
Nope.
All right, 2260.02, English language proficiency. Nothing. 2271.01, Start College Now program.
That one, I was just wondering, the part that's taken out, we can no longer get reimbursed? if the student fails the class? What's the rationale there? Or they don't often have the money in the
Sounds like a question for Keith.
He's checking the language here. Actually,
That's a
Jennifer,
good
you know
question.
Jennifer off the top of your head?
Yes, if you actually look at the note that is stricken in red, it talks about whether that authority actually exists is unclear based on statutory language, and districts are advised that differing interpretations exist and should consult legal counsel before selecting this option. So we thought maybe then that was not a good option. If it's that much in question, perhaps it's not something we should. And that was something we talked about with Mr. Bannock when he was here.
Okay. You hate to have kids just take classes and have us pay tuition and then not have that expectation that they pass the class. But that probably wouldn't happen too often.
Yeah, is this a situation that we're finding, that we are having students fail these classes?
You know, it's not risen to my attention. I don't know, do you know, Jennifer, being new?
There is, I know of one that is pending from last school year, and one that is in process for this fall.
So
It's
not
fairly
all.
rare.
I don't have any problems with taking it out. I was just wondering why.
Sure.
And I can see. Yep, that makes sense to me too.
Okay, so,
If I may just say something about that, having done that in the past as a superintendent, we kept it in policy because of the fact that there was a motivation to continue the classes and finish the classes. Otherwise, we were paying for them to fail. We look at that as simply a way of preventing them from just walking away from the class. So I think it's, my personal opinion is I think it's important that the motivation stays there, that if we're going to put up the money for them to take the class, they should take responsibility whether they pass the class.
You say
Gradual release of responsibility goes on to them.
basing the motivation of having it in the policy so that it can be seen, or actually acting on it and testing the legal waters to see if we have the legal ability to actually take the money back?
I would follow up on that.
yeah, you do raise a valid point there, Jim, when it's in policy. I guess the question remains what the legality is. Is there something else that is a motivating factor that doesn't rise to the level of being in the policy?
Personal relationships with children, which usually works, not always. You know, we'll probably end up eating a few classes that the kids don't pass. You know, we have it currently as a practice, and it's happening. Would the frequency of failing classes happen more often if they didn't have to reimburse? I don't know many students who take classes with the intention of failing, right? So I couldn't predict. What would happen.
But it happens.
It happens. It happens now, even with this threat or reality of having to reimburse.
Is it something where a parent or guardian could sign a contract?
I think we do, I'm sure.
You already do?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, then you have a legal contract to pursue there.
I will just tell you, in a couple of occasions, you know, when students have failed courses, I've only known of a couple where it was, might I say, intentional. Like they didn't start it with the intention of failing, but when it got hard, they just walked away. Usually the kids are struggling, and now on top of failing a college class, now you're punishing them, you know, for trying something by reimbursing the cost. There's a number of ways you could view this.
I think a contract is more motivating than policy. I think a lot of people don't pay attention to policy as much as remembering that I signed a contract and need to hold my child or this child accountable.
The contract didn't need to be backed up by policy, though.
Yeah.
Well, I guess a question I would have, you know, once a policy is approved, then another step in the process is to go through administrative guidelines and look at our practices. So I think it would be worth investigating. We may be able to keep that as a practice. That's if you don't fulfill your obligation here, we will ask for the tuition back, and it's possible we could do that without it actually being in the policy. And maybe, I don't know legally if that would put us in a better set, or a better setting, because then we would just put that in the agreement that parents and kids sign when they would do a start college shop class.
So there's other reasons kids might fail too, you know, something happened tragically in the family or whatever. So it's not.
Yeah, the opt-out provisions. At the university, there's various drop dates having to do with what percentage of your tuition is refunded. And I would certainly much rather have a student withdraw or officially drop a course than just walk away and we assume the responsibility for it.
I think these are very good points to put in there, because if we're taking the responsibility to help students move on, which I agree with, then they should take the responsibility to understand that there are guidelines to follow. No one intentionally wants to fail, but the bottom line is this does give them the gradual release of responsibility that they have to take it on, and we're passing it on to them. So I just think it's a good way of a learning process too.
And the policy says that the district may self-reimburse. So we don't have to decide today whether administration should actually do that. That's a case-by-case situation, and probably would want to consult with legal.
It kind of goes like what Jane just said. Jane pointed out the fact that, you know, something tragic happens, you know, then we have the right to say, hey, we understand. Makes it personal.
I'm fine with leaving that paragraph in, since it says may, and leave that for the case-by-case decision.
Me too.
I think it's a valid note there for us to note, for administration to know that there's some uncertainty in the law of whether you can actually get it back, though. So you may want to think about that.
Well, but that would
Before you
be
take that action.
Right, that would be on the student's family to challenge it.
Right.
And we want the onus on them to challenge it.
Okay, so does everybody feel comfortable leaving those paragraphs in?
Sure.
Yeah, the note paragraph won't stand, that's just the note from
Right.
Neola, just that last paragraph.
Okay, so the last paragraph that's currently struck in the draft. Okay, so that was the Start College Now program. Moving on to the next policy, 2412, homebound instruction. Comments? Okay, so I'm not hearing any. Going on to 2460, exceptional education needs. 2460.03, independent education evaluation. 3120.01, job descriptions. 3120.04, employment of subs. 3121, criminal history record check.
I was wondering about this one, about it's, I just think the board there should be a policy about what happens. And not leave it all on the district administrator's shoulders. I don't know. It just seems like such an important part of the process.
I'm not sure I understand this, Jane. The administrator would just have to make sure that it occurs, so it's an operations issue.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, we've got protocol for this to occur already. I think in this case, they're just ensuring that it happens in districts where it may not.
Sure. Okay, so 3160, physical examination.
I was wondering why we were removing a paragraph. I'm guessing the removal of that paragraph was something you all said.
See if I can get more insights to that.
I guess if they think we don't need it, since we already have the other policy that covers the medical examination, so the administrator.
Okay.
Well, it's supposed to be a technical corrections.
provide any comment, Dr. Hills?
Just checking to see if they had any, here we go, this is actually considered a technical correction.
Okay.
Yeah, so and again, just remind everybody, technical correction is not really changing the content. This one is a little more, usually it's just a word or two. So they don't feel that this changes the content of the policy, just shows that it improves clarification.
Okay. Any other concerns with 3160? No? All right, 3215, use of tobacco by professional staff.
There's a bunch of these, and I was just wondering, why are the definitions in here instead of in the policy that covers all the definitions?
I would guess these are specific to this particular content. I think the definitions up above are more, are you talking about in the bylaws?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are more general, aren't they? Let's see here.
Some of them just seem.
Well, in some of these too, we have multiple because we have certified staff and non-certified staff, and these just get put right into the employee handbooks.
But say things like the term school property, that just seems like it's so general that it should be. I mean, some of them make sense, like the electronic smoking device, or the term anytime.
So is there actual concern about the policy language here?
It just seems that it's wordier than it needs to be, and I think policy should be as concise as possible.
If we pulled those definitions out though, and put them as general definitions, we would also have to search through every policy to make sure that those words aren't used in a different policy, or I shouldn't describe it right, to see if they are used in a different policy and make sure that the same definition applies in that policy, as opposed to the way they've done it here, that definition only applies to this policy.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if the definition is within the policy, it's only going to apply to that term in that policy, not every single thing that we have written.
Okay.
If I could also offer, I just went into the definitions that we currently have, and it's definitions that would be used generally through many policies. So for instance, time of day or school property are not defined in that area. So then I don't know where else it would be defined actually.
Well, what Lance said makes perfect sense.
Okay, so any concerns from anybody with this policy then? No? All right. Moving on. 3230, conflict of interest. So this is going to come up a few times and it's going to have that same appearance language. So we'll just pull those all and do that research. I think that makes the most sense, yes. 30, unless there's other comments on this one, but it's, okay, we'll see it again in a little bit. 3231, outside activities of staff.
Yeah, we had something on that, and I was wondering, where do we address social media? Is that in the employee handbook, John? Use of social media in your personal?
There's
Okay.
a set of guidelines that have been incorporated.
Okay, good. Then I don't have any problem here.
Okay, so moving on. 3340, grievance procedure.
This one I just want to note that the draft that's there, this is another example of something that's very different from our current procedure. And frankly, we had a hard time taking their changes and incorporating them into our current policy. This is probably something I should have given you more of a heads up on. And I wonder again, this is probably one, if we are taking the time to review specific policies, this might be one. Does the board want to stick with our original or go with the Neola policy, which, and this would be one where we possibly could have some risk, I suppose, because we're talking about grievance, we're talking about job security. And if you look at the, I guess if the board is interested, I'd have to do an analysis of what the differences are, and it would be difficult, frankly, but is there something significant in our policy that makes it worth keeping as opposed to trying, because grievance procedure is something that comes up fairly regularly. And I struggle sometimes to, as I've already said, to incorporate their changes into our very unique language.
Because of the frequency and the legal implications too, I would be more inclined to want to stick with theirs rather than kind of more thoroughly perhaps than what I would do. If that makes sense.
But the board may do, because I understand, this is a really important process. I don't know how people feel if they want to take the time to, now that it's been called out, to look at it again, if we're going to bring some back,
so.
this might be one.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at, although my initial thought is along with Pat's that they not only vet this thoroughly, they continue to do it in an updated fashion, unlike some of our older policies, which may not have been reviewed statutorily for years.
Yeah, I think that's good, but I also think that if we don't have any urgency, let's just take a second
Right.
look.
Yep.
And thank you, Dr. Hiltz, for pointing that out, because this really is such a critical policy.
So this one's tabled?
Table, please, yep.
President's over just to point this next one and deals with half of the
Okay, so I think we're going to be at the halfway point at the next policy, and I think my question is to everybody is, do we want to power through, or do we want to say this isn't urgent? We can bring the other half back, any that Dr. Holtz wants to highlight tonight?
If I could just ask my team, is there anything on here that you need approved or move forward tonight? Is there anything time sensitive? I don't think so. I wasn't aware of anything, so I think we could pause here.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
The Title IX policy really should be reviewed because that technically was August.
Yes. Okay,
That's-
thank you.
It's the very last one.
Okay.
And it's 19 pages long.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. Why don't we go to that one, and then that'll be the last one of these for tonight, and we'll do the second half of the review along with the ones that are coming back.
And I would just commend that move, because this is good that we're looking at these very specifically on this. We get a lot of points of view.
Tricia?
Yeah.
I was going to ask that the one on the animals on district property be tabled also and be looked at to include some of the things that are going on right now in the district. And
We would be, right? We're planning to table all that second half.
And I wonder if people who have specific interest in that policy, I understood there was some, if we could just get a couple of questions, we could answer those
Sure.
at the next question, the next meeting, right? Now, if it's just questions, if it's just discussion, then that obviously we can't hold outside the meeting. But if there's specific questions or research you'd like me to do, just let me know, and we'll have that ready for you.
Can we also do the PPE one? There's nothing really new in that one, but it would be good going into next week if we had that.
Okay. So, just to recap.
8550.1.
All right, just to recap for everybody, if there's any questions for Dr. Hiltz on the animals on district property, you need any specific information, please send that to him so they can be more prepared. Not that they're not tonight, but we're not addressing that one tonight, and we've heard quite a bit on that particular issue. So please send your questions to Dr. Hiltz, and then we're going to do the PPE policy, 8450.01, and then we'll do the Title IX, and then that will conclude the policy review for tonight's policy meeting. And we'll do the rest at November's meeting. Okay, so 8450.01.
I had concerns about, in the very first paragraph, the use of may. I think if there is a declared public health emergency, that should be a will. The very first paragraph, it says,
oh, yeah, right.
during times of the very first sentence. This seems that if it's a declared public health emergency, we have to do something. It might not be much of anything, but it should be addressed.
Some kind of communication or
That's
something.
a separate phrase marked off by or. Because during times of elevated communicated disease community spread, which we don't have a definition of, or declared public health emergency, which we do definitely have a definition of. The district, and I think the may is there because the first phrase is not a defined phrase. It could be lots of different.
So we should divide it into two sentences?
Yeah.
Or I would just tell you that philosophically, I almost always choose may, just because we probably will, but it just gives some room for unforeseen situations.
Any other strong feelings on that?
I think we either have to stick with may, or if we were going to do will, we would have to separate it out, because we can't force, or I guess we shouldn't force the superintendent to bring us guidance and procedures every single time there's an elevated communicable disease, flu season, whatever they have. You know what I mean? So we'd have to either stick with may, or we'd have to separate it into two different sentences.
My only concern was with the declared public health.
Well, certainly, if there is a declared public health emergency, if the superintendent isn't bringing us guidance and procedures, we can tell the superintendent to do so.
Right, I agree.
Okay.
And the superintendent would lie.
Yes.
So we're comfortable sticking with may on that?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? All right, does anybody else, or are people still reading a little bit? Does this define what a face mask or covering is? That we don't have, bandanas?
No,
or-
it's not specifically in this. The CDC continues to kind of change their guidance on that, so we left that more as an administrative guideline, so we don't have to bring it back to the board each time there's a
Okay.
change.
That makes sense.
Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions? That policy is good then? All right. Okay, so done with that one. Now let's just do the Title IX one.
So Title IX, if you haven't been following, has gone through some significant changes. And as you can see, this is a 19-page policy designed to, obviously protect people. I wonder, Tabitha, not to put you on the spot, would you have any overarching comments about this policy or the process? Tabitha is our Title IX coordinator. Do all the trainings, coordinate all of our trainings, so we're all good to go on this very important and new expectations. Tabitha, anything?
So this was a pretty major overhaul by the federal government with regard to Title IX, and it requires that we are much more specific about our process steps. We had to change up some of the protocols that we have had in place before. It also requires that we be very, very specific about the new definitions and provide examples of some of those situations that could rise to this issue. I know there was a question that came up because some of the content in this policy is pretty graphically detailed in terms of those examples. And when we checked with legal counsel, they really did advise that it stay in the policy, because if we move it, we have to have it somewhere. And if we move it to somewhere outside of the policy, somebody reviewing the policy to determine if they're bringing a claim may or may not see that information if they don't know where to go. So ultimately, the recommendation was that we leave all of that content in. It was a 10 or 12-hour training that all of us had to go through who are in the Title IX area because of the major overhauls. And this policy really is comprehensive of all of those changes. So
based on your training, anything that you would have recommended is already incorporated in here?
yes, I reviewed the policy after our trainings were complete. That's partly why you didn't get it in August, because we didn't do our trainings until the last 6 weeks or so. That's when they were offered, so yeah, it was significant.
And just to clarify, Dr. Hiltz, and for the board, Tabitha's role actually is the decision maker as part of Title IX, and the coordinator is actually defined here, and the update will need to be made to Tammy Benz, and I'm the secondary coordinator.
That is true.
Yes.
That's true, thank you.
Yeah,
But we have been through the entire 12-hour training.
Yeah. Okay.
Are there any questions about these proposed changes? Can we move this one forward?
We can take you through the 10-hour training. if you'd like.
We will take Tabitha's word on
Yep.
that and our review and questioning of her on that. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so I think then that will conclude our policy review. I'm sorry, Dr. Hill, I know you want to move it all through at one, but this is our main job.
No, it's a good process. So I think what we're looking for is to move these then forward for approval, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
So are we going to motion on the ones that we did get through then? That would be.
If we could, yes.
Yeah.
We get them approved in early November.
Okay, so I'm trying to think of how we should.
I have a list. Do you want me to go through it?
Yes.
Okay. So the board, or the committee tentatively approved all the policies up to 3340 with the exception of 166, you made a change to keep the original policy. 167.3, you're changing it to a 3-minute time limit, and we're going to be adding information about a Google form submission for public comment. 1130 has been tabled. 1260, add paragraph 4 back into the policy. 2271.01, leave last paragraph in. 3230 is tabled. 3340 is tabled. 8450.01 is acceptable, and the Title IX policy, we need to make the change to Tammy Benz. Everything else up to 3362.01.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we approve what, as stated, the policies as stated by Clerk Peck.
You made the motion?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right, motion carries. And we will come back to more policy at the next ad hoc meeting, and of course at the regular board meeting, where these will be on the agenda again, the ones that we just went through. Okay, so taking us to item 8 on the agenda, project relaunch update.
Our favorite topic. So, as you know, we've been proceeding with a number of actions to return students to school next Monday. This is, and I apologize if the board can't see this, I'll just kind of walk you through the presentation that was uploaded. So the first page, the student demographic, we know there's a lot of interest in that. So originally, we expected between about 75% of students to choose to return in person. When it was asked to be a commitment, we ended up in that 66% range. It varies widely across the district, 50 to 90%. And so that was interesting. We didn't expect that. And so, of course, that leads to other changes in our plan. So the staffing. So at the elementary level, we originally expected that we would need about 20 teachers to teach in that virtual setting. And we had that number and a few more we had expressed interest in teaching in a virtual setting. With the decrease in the number of students returning, we now needed 41 virtual teachers. So we were able to grant the request for anyone who wanted to teach virtually, and of course their certifications matched the need. And then we had to recruit 9 more teachers who had not requested to teach virtually. And so the way that was completed was we talked to the building principals. They identified those with the skill set, had a conversation with those teachers about making that shift. And for the most part, that was a very, I guess, just collaborative process. People agreed to do that. And so that's how the virtual teachers were selected. Let me pause there and see if there are questions.
And I don't know the background per se, but some of the information I believe the board received indicated that that wasn't a collaborative process, and that an example would be the principal was put on the spot at some point in time and said, I need a name and I need a name now.
Okay.
To me, that would not be a definition of collaborative.
I would agree with that.
So, and again, I don't know the story, I'm just bringing it out, we haven't had a chance to discuss this at all. I would encourage whomever in administration to go back and have conversations with principals regarding certain situations where teachers perhaps were asked, I can't even say asked, where they were told what they were going to do.
And I think that, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm saying, not that, I don't want to get into
Sure.
or whatever. I think it's the process that is important.
Yes. Yeah. And if I could, there probably are, I'm not certain, but there probably are situations where we did have to transfer, right? If we couldn't find a teacher who wanted from a specific school based on enrollments, right? This is all driven by numbers, as well as the collaborative process. Then if someone has to go, then we would ask the principal to make that kind of determination.
Sure.
So in all cases possible, and in the feedback I've received, in most cases it was a collaborative effort. I think there were a couple where there had to be a transfer. And to meet the needs of the students in the virtual setting, we needed a teacher with the proper certification.
But I just, if there are an example that was shared with me was that the teachers collectively had what they perceived as a better alternative that would have met the needs, but it wasn't given an airtime. So if, and again, I don't know all the details, if those instances could be reviewed, I believe that would be extremely valuable in terms of morale. If the end result isn't any different, that's one thing. But to me, the process and incorporating that feedback and truly listening to what those third alternatives will be, I think that's important.
I hear exactly what you're saying. I've reviewed several. Let me leave it there. I hear what you're saying. I'll go back and make sure there's nothing we missed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Schultz, can you just clarify, when you say that it was a principal determination of who the virtual teachers would be, did those principals have notice of, we're going to need X amount from your school, from these grades, think about it, giving the principals some time to talk to their staff? Or is this something that just arose in a meeting without any notice to principals?
No, first we've been meeting with principals regularly throughout this process. And I'm thinking of a couple of situations. I'm thinking of one situation where a teacher was transferred who didn't want to. And the conversation had been going on for days, if not weeks. Certainly preliminary conversations, like I said, originally we thought we were going to need 20. So now we need, 9 more, or I guess whatever we thought we needed, or whatever we can find. So once we solidified our numbers, which I think people understand that we had to individually contact 1,200 families, right, to confirm some choices, and that took a lot of time. So once we knew we were getting close, once we kind of started to hone in on the numbers, we started to have the conversations with staff. So this was not a, oh my gosh, we have to panic, I need a name. This was a conversation that was going on for at least a week, if not more.
And Keith, we're getting, we've gotten a lot of letters, particularly in the last 48 hours, that are reporting things that happen to other people. That's always problematic. But I would like a little bit more definition to the statement that all the teachers who wanted to be virtual became virtual teachers. Or is the statement rather that all those who wanted to be virtual and fit the needs became virtual? It's a secondary?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so
If I misspoke, that's an important clarification,
Right.
yes.
It's the needs of the service.
Yes.
That in the end, they had to fit the needs that were there.
Absolutely.
And that has to be clearly, very clearly communicated, because I think that's where you end up with two people talking past each other and then claims of dishonesty going
Yes.
on.
So I like that Jeff pointed out the number of emails for 48 hours, because I tell you, I've been getting nonstop calls for about 5 days. And I guess I want to go back to this with the assigning virtual teachers from teachers that didn't want to be virtual. Is there room for modification? Is there anything, are you saying that the situation as it is would be assign teachers to virtual and in-person, this is the best possible situation?
Yes, no doubt. Now, let me clarify that, because there are no ideal solutions. This is the best we can do right now. And it has been collaborative. It has been communicated. It has been days of meetings and reviewing practices and looking at numbers. And I should really, at this point, I probably should have let off with this, but I just a general statement about this. Maybe I'll use one of my analogies. Some of you know, I used to make my living as a carpenter, and those analogies sometimes help. I feel like I've been asked to build a house with some very specific requirements, and all of my lumber is warped, and all of my nails are bent. And every time I pick a piece of lumber or a nail, someone's saying, not that lumber, not that nail. And in the end, we built a house as requested. And now, the day before we want to move in, people are saying, I don't want that house anymore. I want something very different. The background work to get this done has been very intense, time intense, creativity intense, communication intense. Yes, this is the best we can do.
So Dr. Hills, I don't mean to imply, I don't think anybody does, but the immense appreciation to you and the administration. But that withstanding to hear from dozens upon dozens of teachers that have communicated the messages that we've been receiving warrants this more detailed discussion. And that's why I'm wondering if there is some room for flexibility. We gave secondary schools the autonomy to figure out what made sense for them. And now I look back and think, well, why aren't we doing that same level of flexibility for the elementary schools, where they can figure out within their buildings what makes the most sense for their specific population, their size. And one question I have is, in these determinations and in these assignments, how much was the value of the teacher-student, teacher-family relationship a factor?
Excellent questions. Really get to the heart of what we're trying to do. So, at the secondary level, we need to talk about the differences. First of all, we did not offer to separate virtual instruction from in-person instruction at the secondary level, and that is one of the main defining factors. Once we say we're going to separate staff to deal with a certain segment of the population, and now we know what that segment of the population is, we have to staff for that. So I will tell you that Mrs. Sheridan and her team did a really smart thing by grouping the elementary schools into, I think it was 4 groups of 3, pairing AGR schools with non-AGR schools to maximize efficiency, also to try and keep some semblance of of a team here. And a number of elementary teachers are teaching students from multiple schools in a virtual setting. Now, we had a few guiding principles. To speak to your second point about relationships, and I'll come back to a couple other points, but one thing we wanted was to try and keep students in their home schools. That was very important.
In-person students.
In-person students, thank you for their clarification. Yes, keep in-person students in their home schools. We also wanted to try to keep elementary teachers teaching in their grade level. We were able to do that in all cases but one. We had to change a grade level. We wanted to try and make this move as seamless, as stress-less, if that's even a word in these pandemic times, as to continue learning as much as we possibly could. So the reason we couldn't give elementary schools the option to do their own thing is I needed teachers from multiple schools to work with kids from multiple schools. If I pull back a virtual teacher from one school, I've got other schools now that are going to have gaps. So the offering of the separating of teaching the virtual and the in-person, and I don't mean to use this as a negative thing, but that was a staff request, right? We can't do both at the same time. Okay, we hear you, we care about you, and so we'll do that. But this is the result. This is another bent nail, right? Work board, whatever. So we couldn't offer that same flexibility. Also at the secondary, we have very specific certifications. If I teach science, I'm not teaching English, right? Can't teach English. So I don't have that same flexibility with respect to certifications as I do at the secondary. Also, with our two high schools in particular, having very different schedules. 5 days a week works better in the flex mod, 4 works fine in the block. They're working those differences as well. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, there was, like Pat said, I don't want to get into the details of every single move. That's not our job. But I want to give you one example that we heard of so that you understand. Sure. So one of the examples we heard of was a teacher who was required to teach virtually, who wanted to teach in person. Totally understandable. We had more classes that needed teachers to teach virtual than we had teachers volunteering teachers. But she had 20 of her 22 kids wanting to stay in person. So her point was, why would you, if I'm willing to teach in person with my 20 same kids, why would I be the one? Now, maybe anyone forced to do what they didn't want to do would say, why would I be the one? But that seemed to be a pretty solid example of how can that be the best choice, as opposed to a teacher who maybe had a good chunk of their kids not wanting to come in person.
Yeah.
That's the kind of examples we're getting, and that's why it's hard to see it as that's the best we can do.
And I have something to add to that too. I think that the way that you did it was because teachers told us we can't teach virtual and in person at the same time. You heard those concerns, so came up with a different plan, but it came with a whole set of more problems. And I think that's what's going to happen during this pandemic is that you have all these choices and each one comes with a set of problems. But what I'd like to see is, or have us think about is, how are we going to move forward and pivot when something better can be done to change things in a more positive way? Maybe in a specific school, maybe in a specific grade level. How, and maybe you haven't thought about this as an admin team, but how can we be as flexible as possible so that on the one hand you want to have the same policy across the board, but on the other hand, the people who are in the field can sometimes see something in a different way and say, will you allow us to do it this way because it's going to work better for our teachers, our families, our students? Is there a way to be able to be flexible in situations without setting a precedent for everyone.
So I think we built flexibility into the system, mainly for parents and students, right? That's who we serve. And we've said, do you want to come in person? Do you want to, and we've even, mixed that up a little. As we add flexibility for families, we've added restrictions for ourselves. So I think what you're asking is, have we tried to be creative? Have we spoken to, remember, this has all been built from feedback.
But I'm talking about moving forward.
Yeah, okay, so moving forward.
When a situation arises, and somebody
It's hard to imagine, so right now, we've set our class lists based on the flexibility we offered families, right? And we've been communicating to families, we've been communicating to the staff, and that's when you started hearing some concerns. I can't even begin to think about being flexible until we at least get started what we've started. I don't know, and I don't know if you have any examples, Beth. I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm trying to think of.
Well, what if a principal and their teaching staff in a building say, you know what, I think we could do this, and I think this would actually work better with these two teachers in this classroom.
If
they
it's
have the ability to do that.
In their classroom, sure, or in their school, sure.
This,
That's
as long as it doesn't
what I'm thinking of, at
impact
the school
other
level.
schools, right? Because most of the requests that we've received would impact other schools and
Right.
cause a whole house of cards kind of situation. We right now are, because of the ability to separate the two modalities. Our K-5 is a very interconnected, interdependent system right now. If you pull anything out, it's going to cause ripples throughout.
I'm thinking at the school level.
Yeah, if you're talking flexibility, like, hey, I've got 19 kids and somebody has moved out and you've got 17, can we move? Absolutely. Again, that's a conversation we want to have with a family as well. Relationships are important to us. That's why we try to, keep students at their home schools. I could balance everybody's class sizes right now, and we could just transfer kids willy-nilly, right? Even within the 4. But that creates another issue. Beth, you just said something really important earlier, and that's something we've learned since March. Every time we find a solution, there's 10 more problems that come with it, and each of those 10 triggers, 10 or 20 people to call with concerns.
But when you said we're finding solutions because for our children and parents, because that's who we're serving, I agree with that to a point. I also think you take care of your parents and your children when you take care of your teachers.
Agreed.
And right now, with the communications that we've been receiving for a variety of reasons, they're not feeling it. And that's concerning to me. And I'm sure it's concerning to all of us. And this whole situation is really stressful for everyone. But I think we have to, just keep plugging away and attempting to keep pivoting and changing, and it's just hard.
Yeah, and I think with the grade schools, 5 days a week is too much. They've lost all their prep time and stuff because everything is so concentrated. There's so many more things to do every day. They really need that Friday off.
I'm sorry, we have to stop. They didn't lose prep time. The 5 days a week was their request. We found a way to build prep time. We have been flexing. That's my frustration. We have been working with our staff to try to come up with the best solutions. This is as good as we can do right now. Perhaps once we get students back in and within the schools themselves, they find we will definitely allow that kind of
So are you saying
flexibility.
that every teacher has their contracted 30-minute duty-free lunch and their required prep
Yes.
minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, could we get that sent out to the staff? Because there's a lot of disagreement on this point, that they think that the kids are coming into the class earlier and they lose that time. The kids are staying later at the end of the day, they're losing that time. They have their meal periods, they're losing that time. And going live now, they're losing the Fridays too. And so what we're hearing is, I think one of the writers put up 3 hours and 40 minutes a week of time that they've lost. And so I think we need, and I think that the district needs information back if there's counter information to that.
We made sure we made sure we built, 30-minute duty-free lunch in. We made sure we built in prep time. Does it exactly match pre-pandemic? I couldn't guarantee that.
If the encore is in the elementary teachers' classrooms, when is their prep time?
Andrea, are you able to help me?
Because that's one of the messages that we've received is normally our prep time is during encore. We don't have that. Is there a different prep time now that encore is going to be in their classrooms?
Encore will be in the elementary classrooms, but the encore teacher will be there responsible for the students. So that will allow the hour of encore time that provides prep for our core teachers every day.
So that is a change then, because when we last talked about it,
Yes.
the elementary teacher was going to be there supervising them.
That's correct.
That might be one of the reasons why we received
Yes.
those.
Yeah, so that
Yes.
needs to be strongly communicated too, that you're not expected to be in the classroom during the hour.
And that has been communicated, and in fact, the master schedules have been built in the past 2 weeks. So our core and our encore staff both are recognizing that as a positive change in response to teacher feedback.
Now, I've got a question because I don't know much about the prep procedures for elementary school. Can a teacher, take their laptop and go someplace else and do the preps they need to do, or do they need to be in the classroom to set things up during prep time?
Sure, that's a great question. Yes, they can take their technology as well as any other additional resources, and our elementary principals are looking for an additional space within the building where they could identify a separate, safe space for every educator from a classroom who, it might be in a library, it might be in a science room, where then they could go and that could be their safe space to prep throughout the day, where no one else will be in that space and it'll be identified for an individual teacher.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Keith, this is really good that we're asking you the questions and the team the questions, because we have questions and people ask us questions and we don't have answers for them. And so I don't want you to feel like we're bombarding you right now, but these are a lot of things that I was wondering. For instance, is there any kind of site-based management taking place within the elementary schools like there is at the secondary level? You're saying that there is the flexibility, the communication that Jeff pointed out, I think is very important for all of them. Obviously, Andrea, obviously some of the teachers don't feel they've been communicated. So I've always said, communicate, communicate, and communicate again. I mean, that's the biggest thing, because we're getting these questions and we don't know either. So I'm just going to exhort you to continue to communicate with them and have that flexibility in the individual schools, because I do know all the elementary schools are quite different physically. John Marshall is not like Riverview or like Jefferson. I mean, that's completely different in older buildings. So how is that when it comes to spacing students too? I don't know, but I have to ask the question, how are you doing that within those older buildings?
Yeah, or just larger classes, right? We talked about how the percentage of families who've chosen to return their students varies from 50 to 90%. That flexibility, that variance occurs all within the K-5 level. What do we do when we have classes of 25 or 26 students? We move them to a larger classroom, right? We're using the 4K community rooms in some cases. We're using libraries. Art rooms and music rooms are larger, right? So we've had to also, in addition to redoing class lists, we've also had to move some teachers and students to larger spaces because we have to guarantee the 6 feet of social distance, right? And so that's what's allowing us to do that.
And I also think it's important to realize, in all fairness, the enrollment parents were given 100% flexibility in either virtual or in person. That 100% flexibility on that end of the spectrum dictated all of the things that you guys were talking about. Because you could have accommodated many more requests internally if you said, okay, if you started the other side, say how many want to teach virtually versus how many want to teach in person, and then you only allow that many students to go virtual.
Right.
It's a never-ending math problem.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I just want to be fair and point that out, that I don't know how you guys came up with what you did, but it's,
Yeah.
it's not an easy equation.
I don't want to say anything that seems unfair or whatever, and I kind of want to go off of Jim's point about the fact that we do get so many questions and we need the answers. But I think it's important to remember that we are elected, we have an accountability, and we're not simply a rubber stamp for, this is the update of the relaunch when we hear from upwards of 50 teachers and the extensive amount of time I've personally spent, and I bet you I'm not the only one. From what I've heard, a number of board members have been called over the last few days. I do want to point out the fact about staff preference, because I know that keeps being brought up as this is what we were told. But a message that keeps coming back to me is that we didn't have enough information. If we knew we were going to have to pack up our classes and move and try to get final grades and prepare for our parent-teacher conferences and be awaiting a class list, I wouldn't have chosen this option. So as far as staff preference, that's something that I continue to hear. I just want to clarify too, and just to go back to Jeff's point, I've been taking notes on everybody's things here, our comments, but are the staff responsible for all their cleanup, wiping down their rooms? This doesn't come out of their prep time at all. It doesn't come out of their 30-minute duty-free lunch. That's another message that I continue to hear. People think their lunch is going to be infringed upon with sanitizing their classroom.
Andrew, are you able to speak more to that?
Sure, maybe.
Sorry, Andrea.
Mrs. Lloyd and I maybe will team response to this. So I'll begin by saying that certainly was an area of concern that the principals discussed. And in previous years in our master schedule, we allowed 40 minutes for 20-minute lunch and 20-minute recess, which gave about 10 minutes flexibility. That still responded and gave an educator a 30-minute duty-free lunch. So what we decided to do is extend that to be 60 minutes. Because we know we need a little bit more flexibility between just having students eat in the classroom and then getting ready and going to recess. So it still accommodates a 30-minute duty-free lunch for educators. It extends the period overall to be 60 instead of 40. So it gives more flexibility at the site for us to be able to respond. And do you want to talk about cleaning?
Sure. So at the elementary level, it won't need to be cleaned because we don't have different cohorts in there every day. So the kids stay at their desk. No other kids are at that desk. It can be cleaned at the end of the day. At the secondary level, it's different. The kids are going to be moving throughout the school. So each teacher has a bottle of 40 chemical. The teacher will spray it on a rag, pass it around to the students wipe down their desk and chairs. They may need to end class a couple of minutes early to allow that to happen and allow the kids to get to their next class. But that's the only way we can ensure that everything's getting sanitized in between each class.
How are you handling the passing time?
The passing time is fine because they're not going to be by each other for 15 minutes. So if they're just passing one another in a hallway,
it's 15 minutes
in a 24-hour period.
But you're not going to pass the same person.
No. And at West, they have the mod system, so it's where the hallways are always pretty empty, and they're passing at all different times. At East, they're implementing some one-way hallways where it's more populated, but no, you wouldn't be passing the same person 15 times in one day. And even at that point, you wouldn't be passing, that passing time wouldn't take 1 minute. You're passing them for 1 second in a hallway.
So we're getting claims that the cleaning materials aren't available in schools. Is that true, or is that a matter of timing, or something's not there yet and will be there in the next couple of days?
I wish Larry Seiler was here because he could tell you that everybody has everything they need.
We have run into an issue where someone sees some cleaning materials and confiscates them for themselves,
Yes.
has them in a classroom. and then so somebody else
Yeah.
doesn't. We've run into that a little bit, but otherwise,
Yeah.
we're ready.
We've had a number of teachers reach out to you guys saying that there's not hand sanitizer by the doors. If you would just let us know that right away, or the principal, we can take care of that, because there's sanitizer everywhere. If it's missing, that's because somebody took it for their own personal use in their classroom.
And we've invested in additional buckets of wipes to allow that for every educator in the elementary buildings. It was a conversation by the principals, and they advocated for that, and we've allocated monies to be able to purchase those.
So could we get, with regard to the prep times, could we get two schedules, the traditional schedule and the new schedule showing, so that we can show that to the teachers as well when they ask us that this is what we were told, here's what you used to have, here's what you have now, so that we can, illustrate that they aren't losing that time. Sure. Okay, that'd be good.
I don't know how much variety there is between buildings, right? I don't know. And I just feel compelled, not trying to hide anything, but folks, there could be 100 of those questions, right? And I know prep time's a pretty big deal. So yes, we can do that. But I don't know how much of this is really policy board level issue and how much is administrative implementation issue. But I understand you're getting a lot of questions. Let me see what we can do to help.
Well, and here's the thing. One elementary school in particular has had so many communications, nearly begging, please stand up for this school. And when these are people that are worried, that have indicated, I've never reached out to a board before, I'm nervous about retaliation, that, first of all, that's so concerning to me, because that's not any kind of message that we should be sending or that should exist in the community. But when there are teachers that have been teaching for decades, serving this district, saying, I've never written to the board before, this is the first time, but please help us. We can't ignore that. We have to. We have a duty and an obligation to follow up on that. These are different times, and that's why, to go to the question that Beth raised, at what point can we pivot? Can we say, oh, this one school in particular, they have 24, 26 students in their rooms. It's not the video of 12 or 13 that went out to parents. It's very, very different. And can we get a second look on possible improvements in that particular school? That's a real question.
I know the school you're referring to, and I can tell you, the average class size in that school is smaller than it was before the pandemic. I can tell you that they don't have the largest class sizes in the district. I can tell you, and I hate to even have this conversation in an open board meeting, but as you continue to push this, I have to tell you that there has been some internal bullying among the staff at a particular school. I have to tell you that it is, in my opinion, when we have worked 4 weeks to accommodate everyone's requests, and now in the end, when I don't get what I want, I call parents to go to the school board. That's wrong. That's unprofessional. We work with our staff to the best of our ability. We care about them, and then when they don't get what they want, exactly, they try to bring public pressure against the school board to counter the decision that we've been working on for 3 weeks. That's not professional. That's selfish. I had conversations with these people. They told me, I just care about the students in my school. And I told them, I don't have that luxury. I've got 8,000 students and 1,300 staff and all the families. We're doing our best. I am outraged that those people, that our staff in our schools who we're trying to work to support, are doing that to their families, to this board. I'm going to stop talking.
I was assured that they were not telling parents to do that. But this is my take on this. Yes, we tried to build this with bent wood and bent nails and warped wood, but in the end, it wasn't about the people building it. There's lots of skill, there's lots of energy, there's positive intent, but in the end, we have a house that's not safe.
Disagree. Completely.
I just don't think.
Masking,
Of 30,
6 feet of social distancing in every classroom, sanitizer everywhere, cleaning protocols. This is going to be the safest place these kids are going to be, unless they're quarantined at home. I'm utterly convinced of that.
and I'm concerned about the encore teachers going from room to room to room. If they get exposed somewhere along the line, they're going to, each class that they're in.
Unless, if they go within 6 feet of the students for 15 minutes. If they stay in a designated area and stay 6 feet away from the students, then that wouldn't result in a quarantine. So that will be important. That will be important.
That's slide 6.
I do have one question
That would be
about
important.
CARES money and the flexibility of that CARES money, because I know that we've received CARES money. Can that be used for temporary staff or one-year contracts or?
I didn't hear the question, but I saw people looking at me.
CARES money,
CARES
can
Act.
it be used for additional staff temporarily because of the pandemic and the situations for extra supervision and those kinds of?
CARES money can be used, ESSER in particular, can be used for anything that was caused by the pandemic. We already submitted our application. It's in the loop. We're buying a lot of stuff that we've already talked about. We've paid for some staffing, health aides in particular. Escapes me exactly what's in it, but we are using every nickel of our ESSER funding. There's $54,000 that hangs in the balance right now because a court decision went in our favor recently. So the DPI just freed up an additional $54,000. So that's a small amount, but we could use it for anything that was caused by.
But keep in mind that a lot of that is going to be used on consumables. Hand sanitizer keeps going up, buckets to even get the wipes, the buckets have been increased hugely. Like all of these costs are going up tenfold, and those of you who work in a business know that. The pandemic has not been nice, especially to the products that we need in order to keep everybody safe. So it looks like a lot of money, but that's going to go really, really fast the longer this pandemic goes on.
As a matter of fact, we had a prioritized list that we got about halfway down when we submitted our ESSER funds. And there was even the last one we carved in half because there was room for half of it, but not the other half. It was probably some personal protective equipment that was right at the tail end of our priorities that we still needed, we still bought, but we didn't use ESSER money for. I've heard about a second wave of ESSER funds coming, but nothing definitive.
And then I just wanted to make one comment. Even though this discussion has been a difficult one, I think it's a super important one. And I'm not sorry that we've had it. Because I think it made a lot of things clear to all of us and to anybody who's watching this board meeting. There's a lot of questions answered, and I think all of us have to remember that we are all on the same team and we have the same goals. And by having difficult conversations, I think we can get closer to doing that, even though that it's hard. And this is an unprecedented, difficult situation for everyone. So I'm sorry if some questions were difficult.
I had a question about the masks. I heard today that Stevens Point has a procedure where the kids change masks halfway through the day, because once the masks get wet, they are not as efficient, and then you're going to start talking about rashes.
I haven't heard anything about that, nor has the nurses or the health department brought that to us.
Okay. I just heard that Stevens Point was doing that, and I thought, what kind of makes
Nope,
sense?
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
Are there other, I think we actually are not finished with the slides. If I'm not mistaken.
Athletics?
Did you get your slide one?
We did, we're on 4 athletics. I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Slide 2, staffing plan. Let's go to slide 3, athletics. Or 4, yeah. So I've been working with the Wisconsin Valley Conference superintendents and the athletic directors and principals. We will continue to offer winter sports unless the board tells me otherwise. I just went with the previous decision. We are, of course, supporting the wearing of masks at all times, even during competition. It's not a popular decision, but we think it's important. We are limiting spectators. It's going to vary a little bit based on sport and facility. Some small arenas just can't allow spectators, but that'll be an individual school decision. I don't know where we're at with this, but at the time I wrote this, we were exploring the possibility of cutting non-conference games because we anticipate quarantines, and so do two things. Minimize cross-conference contamination, to create some spaces for us to do these reschedules, make sure we get our conference games in. And ironically, on Friday, the UW-Madison study came out, and their general conclusion was that students in that 14 to 17-year-old range had the same incidence of COVID, whether they're in sports or out. And I'm sure there's a link to it right there. Questions about athletics?
Yeah, I see that all the Valley Conference schools agreed to go forward with winter sports. Was there any offering from WIA of any other options like they did for? I didn't see anything come through like they did for. They didn't offer any other options.
No, they didn't. They didn't, and you might recall that Stevens Point did not participate in fall. They're coming in for winter as well, based on the experience, right, that things have gone relatively well. So, but no, there was no offer for a spring option. Jennifer, was there anything in the spring? The spring is just spring and fall, right? There's no winter out. Okay, yeah, just want to confirm. So you're right.
Yeah, I didn't see anything.
Yeah. Wrestling's a big question. Don't know how we'll do that.
That was going to be my other question.
Yeah.
How do you wear a mask in wrestling?
Yeah, and they can. Gymnastics was another one they had concerns about with masks. Again, the ADs are working up those kinds of details. If it's determined it couldn't be safe, then we wouldn't do it. But right now, we think we can do all of them. Again, wrestling is the big question.
So the health department has changed its opinion?
Health department, they would still like us to not do sports, right? But they've, as I went back and reviewed the whole, all the feedback, it really said, you start with more minor thing, limiting spectators or eliminating spectators, right? It was more of a progression kind of a statement.
Because I know earlier on the 9th, the recommendation was only varsity, no spectators.
Yeah, and that's, what Joan would say is if you want to have students in school, do everything you can to minimize contact, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's interesting when you look at that UW-Madison study. That surprised me, frankly. Kind of the same way that it surprised me, that schools weren't transmitters of the school setting. Didn't seem to be a setting for transmission of the virus. So we're learning lots of important things.
I did talk to one student athlete from another district recently who was in cross country, and they said their masking requirement was that when they started out running and they were clumped together, they had their masks on. And then after a certain number of feet, I don't know how many yards or feet it was, when everybody started to spread out, then they were allowed to take off their masks. So I mean, some common sense things like that.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about each individual sport, makes sense.
Yeah, except for, what we're getting in this slide is that they're going to stay masked now. But that's no longer going to be an option. Is that correct?
Yes. Cross country, unique. It's unique. A lot of times you're running by yourself. Basketball, you're never alone. Gymnastics.
Right, but are we leaving it up to the discretion of the coach of that sport to determine when they have to mask or not, or are we just saying you're going to be masked all the time?
You're going to be masked because it's an indoor event, yeah. And if somewhere down the road, the athletic directors and WIA, I did talk to WIA, they are interested in exploring flexibility in the masking. They just say, just do it. So I could see a time, if we find it is safe, maybe there's some exception in this particular sport, but that's not in the works right now.
It goes with everything else along with this pandemic. It's all an evolution, and it's ever changing. So,
Right.
I'm concerned for basketball right now. Being a basketball official, I'm wondering, are basketball games going to be canceled? And how are they going to work with this for officials? Because when you talk about a lot of the officials that officiate basketball, they're between the ages of 55 and 65, average. So consequently, are they going to be able to keep up with the masks, blowing the whistle? I'm thinking about that. How am I going to take this off and blow my whistle and then go through all?
Yeah.
You have to keep the whistle in
You
your
gotta
mask.
keep the whistle
I'm
underneath your
thinking that's
mask.
probably the only way that you're going to be able to. But I am concerned about what's going to happen for that part of the game. How are they going to maintain officials?
I don't know about the officials, but I think anytime that, there are a lot of opportunities for games to be canceled. I think that's why we're talking about minimizing the non-conference, create space, for those rescheduled games. And fewer of them then, right? I think we were allowed 24 in basketball.
Yeah.
Maybe we would only get, I think, 12 and 12. So I think maybe we only get 15, right? Trying to get all our conference games in.
And I don't believe there'll be curling this year. Last I heard, they were going to make ice because not enough people wanted to.
Oh,
So the Wausau West football team came out of quarantine 2 days ago. Is there an update on the West football team?
I don't have Jennifer, anything?
They're still quarantined. Yeah, they're still quarantined.
Oh, they're still
They're
quarantined?
still quarantined?
Yeah, I think there is a, I don't know. I would have to look back. We have a lot of quarantine, so I'm not sure when it's up, but yeah, they're still quarantined.
Did it get extended or what happened?
That was less than 2 weeks ago.
I was looking at an email before I came and it said that they would have been out of quarantine on October 24th.
So maybe they are back today.
Right, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
that
think
would
they are because I looked at the quarantine numbers for the district today and they're significantly lower than they were at the end of last week.
Maybe about 50 kids, so.
I think our staff has been really phenomenal about following our guidelines, especially at work, and it looks like they've been following it out in the community too. So our quarantines are down quite a bit from where they were.
Just continuing on the next slide, number 5. Just, I wanted to reemphasize that the quarantine example. Again, that's the importance of the social distancing, and then again, we are able to guarantee that. Positivity rates, I didn't look today, this was from Friday. Again, they're staying in that, 0.2 to 0.7 range. All in that same general range. And that was about it. Is there anything else I can tell you?
All right, I'm moving on to agenda item 9. Thank you for that update, by the way. Request for closed session pursuant to state statute. We have 2 items to discuss in closed session, so I'm seeking a motion to enter into closed session to discuss those 2 items pursuant to state statute 19.851C. This is a roll call vote. Need a first and a second.
So moved.
Okay. Was that a first by Jeff Lee and a second by Jim Boucher?
Yes. All right, Jim Boucher.
Yes.
Jeff Lee.
Yes.
Kyle Lowe.
Yes.
Beth Martin.
Yes.
Pat McKee.
Yes.
Jane Roosh.
Yes.
Lance Trollope.
yes.
Lee Webster.
Yes.
Tricia Zunker.
Yes.
9-0, that passed.
Okay, that